Rayman the Animated Series is a 1999 animated series that was released on DVD that, getting this out of the way, is a series that I really don't like, but this show is one where I could definitely see why it ended up being the way it is. A lot like what I pointed out with Middle School Moguls, Long Live the Royals, and Villainous, this show most definitely has the vibe of an animated series that did want to have more episodes, but they ended up becoming extremely unlucky as a result, because this show in specific only got 4 episodes, but whereas with Middle School Moguls and Long Live the Royals, they only got 4 episodes, but their last episode at least felt like a finale of sorts. Despite how horrible that the Middle School Moguls finale was, it at least feels like the show was wrapped up in a way. The Rayman animated series, on the other hand, there's no doubt about it, this was a show that was desperately begging for more episodes, because there have been instances where companies put out TV show episodes in an attempt to get more episodes. Take Disney, for example, and what they did for the Beauty and the Beast and Atlantis TV shows. They packaged the episodes in a way to seem like they didn't want those episodes to go to waste, but they did so extremely poorly, to the point where they decided to advertise them as sequels to the original films, but because they were received poorly, that idea was immediately scrapped. And I can assume that Rayman the Animated Series tried to do the same thing, but I don't think that worked out very well, because the show ended up only having 4 episodes, and was released only on DVD and VHS. And doing research for this review, I doubt that the series ever got advertised, and they just threw this into stores, seeing the series as disposable, or they did try to pitch this to a network, but it never got picked up. And big statement, I know, but I can definitely understand as to why that might be. While not an absolute failure like Bubsy, Rayman is a franchise that during the first few games that were released, it was hugely overshadowed by Mario and Sonic, to the point where anything that they did outside of the games would obviously get a lot more attention, due to the fact that they were so big at the time. Like, the games got advertised, and they were semi-popular, but I don't know if the networks really wanted to take a chance with it yet, especially given the fact that video game adaptations around that time were not so good, to put it lightly, and this franchise that only had 2 games at the time was a risky move to air in regards to its series. And also, they presumably only had the first 2 games to work with, even though this show does whatever it wants, though apparently Admiral Razorbeard is an antagonist from the second game. But then again, the Mario and Sonic cartoons were like this too, so I can't get on to this series too much. Doing a bit of research on this show, there were plans to have 26 episodes, but the production literally stopped by episode 5, leaving the show unfinished. Probably because of the fact that this show was not really able to get picked up by other networks that wanted it. And I bring up the production of this show because in regards to my thoughts on this show, I find it to be bland. But full disclosure, outside of Rayman Legends, which is the most recent game in the franchise, I've never played any of the games in this series. But similar to what I did with Thundercats Roar, I'm going in and judging the show by what they deliver as a series on its own merits, because that's what animated shows are supposed to do. And the best way to sum up the Rayman animated series is that, take the rough first seasons of an animated show and make it to where that's all that the series is. I'm talking like The Simpsons, Eek the Cat, Beavis and Butthead, Dexter's Laboratory, SpongeBob SquarePants, Code Lyoko, etc. But they aren't able to grow past those first few episodes. That's the problem that the Rayman animated series has. With how sudden that the production ceased on this show, the entirety of this show just turned into establishing the main characters, but not really. Because most of the series, after all the main characters escape, just became what I could describe as a show where all the characters do is run around and escape from a certain situation. And I'm already getting Lewis and the Aliens flashbacks. And after the first 2 episodes, the show then turns into a more episodic kind of series, indicating that if the show was actually able to finish the intended 26 episodes, the series might have been more akin to something like The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog or SpongeBob, but that's the issue. The series doesn't have enough time to do anything else, now that the show is starting to get things rolling. Given that even in one of these episodes, the characters are still essentially running around, trying to get themselves out of danger, leaving most of the characters completely uninteresting. And no joke, doing some research on this show, despite how scarce the information is, they're only exclusive to this show and this show only. And they are the most cardboard cutout characters imaginable. Oh, Cookie is the stressed out leader type of character that gets needlessly uptight a lot of the time. You mean like Double D from Meta and Nettie, which came out less than a year before this show even came out? Meanwhile, everyone else are the most stock main characters that you could choose for an animated series. Like the only girl character that stands out from an entire group populated by guys, the big dumb but lovable character that has a hard time with his grammar, and the tiny cute character that is forcibly wanting the audience to find him cute. Bettina, Lackmack, and Flips. Those are their names. And the only reason as to why I mention who they are, because the show is so busy constantly having the characters run around that it barely takes a moment to let anything sink in. The only character that you'll remember from this show is Rayman himself, because he's literally the title character, but I'll remember him for that, as well as an issue that I have with him. Rayman in this show is voiced by Billy West, and right from his first appearance in this show, you can tell. Because point for point, he is using the exact same voice that he used for Stimpy from Ren and Stimpy, or even Fry from Futurama, given that the show was new and airing at the time. But part of me feels as if Billy West is kind of phoning things in this show, because a consistent problem that Rayman has in this show is that a lot of his inflections are very weird, and for the record, I've watched enough of Ren and Stimpy to know that Billy West enunciates his lines well, so that this isn't a problem. Either this was an intentional decision, or they just didn't ask him to redo his lines. As Billy West throughout most of the episodes pronounces words that end with an R with an H, and he generally sounds low energy while doing most of his lines.
My, friend here can fix your car. Thanks for the car. Car! No reason to panic, it's just a car. We'll find her. After all, she's in the car. Yup, his car is gone. What does he think we are? The bar is fake. See that bar? That park over there looks safe. The scrap yard.
When usually, Billy West sounds so much more high energy and enunciates his lines much better than this.
Then all you need is a hammer and some glue. And viola! A disco mirror ball! Bender, it's us, your friends. You can drop the hillbilly moron act.
And as for the animation in this show, it's okay. I mean, nowadays, the animation is extremely dated, given that we now have shows like TMNT 2012 or Fairly Odd Parents: A New Wish, which basically pushes the medium to another level entirely. And at the time of this show's release, this was like 2 or 3 years before Jimmy Neutron. But given the competition of what was going on at the time, this show's animation was pretty good, as the expressions do look pretty nice for the most part, and motion-wise, the show's characters move in a way that is very smooth. Although, I will say that the animation is dated, because given that this show came out around the time that companies were still trying to get used to the technology, a lot of what this show does in regards to the visuals make the show look exactly like a video game. Though, the show was produced by a video game company, to be fair, and besides that, another consistent problem that the visuals have is that there are certain points in the episodes where the animation feels like it's stuttering, as if the show was recorded on a DVD that was on the verge of hitting an error due to the disc getting scratched up. So you'd have to walk on eggshells in order to keep watching the episodes. But only, the episodes are still functional in this show, and that the episodes really are that rigid. The show does still have much better animation than Donkey Kong Country, which came out 3 or 4 years prior to this, but is basically better in how it looks, but worse in how it moves. But with Donkey Kong Country, that show is so bad it's good because of the many bizarre moments that it has, and it can make for very good riffing material.
I'd shower you with coconut cream pies.
The Rayman animated series is not really memorable enough to get any ironic enjoyment out of, but it's not bad enough to really hate it that badly. Due to the fact that this show did go through production difficulties that resulted in episode 5 getting scrapped, a lot of the things that I brought up in this review might have been patched up had this show been given more episodes, but as it stands right now, it's a very 4 out of 10 kind of show. The show didn't get me riled up or bored to the point where I had to take breaks after watching each episode, but it's very bland, with also very bland and under-established characters. And due to the fact that this show suddenly stopped after a date episode, the show basically ends with all the characters' IQs dropping hard, and they all think that the detective is gonna stop going after them because he's dating someone, when that's simply not true. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie is a 2004 movie based on the show of the same name. And it is definitely one of the best animated movies, not only directly tied to an animated show, but it's one of the best animated movies so far in this series. The exact same year, in fact, 2004, was an amazing year for animated movies. When the only animated films that came out that year that I didn't like were Home on the Range and Shark Tale, that's quite an accomplishment. And even then, there are some people that debate on whether they like those two films or not. Every other film that year were classic after classic, to the point where I don't think that there was any other year that came close, until 2012. And I believe that the SpongeBob SquarePants movie is one of the best from that year. The only animated movie from 2004 that I find better than this one is The Incredibles, but the SpongeBob SquarePants movie is a close second. SpongeBob is a series that I have talked about on my channel before. The first review that I've ever done was on an episode of the series, and you guys already know what I think about Kamp Koral, but this is the first time that I'm talking about one of its movies. Sponge Out of Water I'll be getting to another time, and I like that movie too, and I haven't seen Sponge on the Run by the time that I'm making this video, but from what I've been hearing, it's not good. So, you know the story of this movie by now. SpongeBob is basically excited to get the job as the manager of the Krusty Krab 2, but Mr. Krabs doesn't give him the job because he's not mature, leading SpongeBob into a depressive episode. All while this is happening, Plankton steals the crown from King Neptune, leading Mr. Krabs to be framed for the action completely. And so SpongeBob and Patrick need to get to Shell City to get King Neptune's crown back, otherwise Mr. Krabs will get executed as a result. Something that I really do appreciate about this movie is that even though yes, this is a SpongeBob movie, and so yes, there are going to be jokes, this movie is the most cinematic of the bunch, in that the movie is actually fit to be released on the big screen, and the film is the most tear-jerking of them all. Sponge Out of Water was also good, but the film only relied on jokes and that's it, and Sponge on the Run is uninspired from what I've heard. Yes, there is a problem that this movie does have. This is an animated movie that you can basically describe as a road trip movie, where the characters need to travel across the land in order to retrieve something. It was a lot more prevalent after this movie. But what works about the SpongeBob movie in comparison to something like the Teacher's Pet movie or the 2017 MLP movie is that this is the only template that they use for the film, so this movie thankfully doesn't go the stupid Act 2 breakup route, which was prevalent constantly even during the time that this movie was released. Everything else that this movie does is completely exclusive to it. I like SpongeBob's arc in this movie where he learns how to embrace his immaturity, which seems to have amped up after this movie for some reason, and this movie is generally quotable, though that might be because of the fact that I watched this movie constantly when I was little, but regardless, on top of this movie's more heartwarming moments, this movie is also really funny. Patrick basically antagonizing King Neptune into dropping the number of days that he'll be giving SpongeBob and Patrick to get King Neptune's crown back. The iconic moment where the stairs that led down to the monster trench makes a bunch of roaring noises. The memorable line that is a variation of the My Leg gag where Fred says, "My eyes!" And also the line that I would basically give to sum up movies like Rock Dog and Boss Baby, where King Neptune thinks that Mindy is stalling! But just like what I said towards Drake and Josh Go Hollywood, even though I do think that the SpongeBob SquarePants movie is the best movie that I reviewed so far, I don't actually have a lot to really say about it, because there's only so many times that I could say that the movie is funny and heartwarming before I need to move on to the next review. Speaking of which, which animated movie am I going to review next? Oh, great. Back in 2021, I did a review of the first SpongeBob spin-off series, Kamp Koral. It was a series that I considered bad, but I decided to go ahead and say that it was bad for now. I ended up getting majorly sidetracked after I reviewed the show when it was brand new, from things like me focusing on shows like Power Players, Code Lyoko, and Kappa Mikey, to me getting burned out constantly and being overwhelmed, to the multiple hiatuses that this show in specific was given. Needless to say, I had bigger fish to fry than constantly keeping up with this show, because me being someone who does have memory problems, I didn't want to forget about any crucial elements from the shows that I was already reviewing / taking notes on, and I didn't want to sidetrack heavily in order to catch up on another series. And since by the time that this video is being scripted and or being put out, I might as well do this review. With this show officially being done now, I can give my final judgment on what I think of this show. Looking back at my original review on this series, it definitely shows its age, not only because at the time, only 6 episodes of this show were available, and I was only able to judge it based on what was out at the time, but at the time, I just moved into a trailer that was incredibly small, and there were constant issues that I was running into while trying to record the audio for the video, such as with my dog barking, as well as the fact that I was constantly feeling hot a lot of the time, and I had a lot of worries in my head at the time, such as things that happened in the same month, computer issues that resulted in me having to get a replacement computer in 2022, and the very small living condition that I was living with at the time. But now that I live in a bigger house, I don't need to worry about any computer issues anymore for a while, and I've had time to breathe and relax. And with me generally coming as far as I have with how I critique things, I can critique how this show is now with a more current lens. And what do I think of this show? Well,
it's a show about nothing. How do we know when it's over?
I do.
back during my original review on this series, I said that Kamp Koral is a series that I barely have anything to talk about because it hardly has anything of substance, and any and all substance that did happen in this show was how it was as a prequel to the original show. And guess what? The episodes after the 6th episode are no better. There are some episodes that I do like, admittedly, and so far in Sean's network reviews, I stumbled upon a ton of shows that are worse and more frustrating, so this show is definitely not top 10 worst shows I reviewed material, but there is literally nothing new that I could say about this show than what I brought up back during my original review. Episodes 7 through 13, I did at least have something interesting to bring up about the show, but even then, there are things that aren't even unique to this show in particular. To recap, this show revolves around a young version of SpongeBob going to summer camp with younger versions of other SpongeBob characters, and that's literally all we get. Like, I understand that the original series had a very basic plot as well, that was basically a vehicle for the show to tell jokes, but like, there was something there in order to show the heart of the series and, you know, connect with the characters, like having SpongeBob work at the Krusty Krab, for example. Kamp Koral is literally the original show set in a summer camp, but you take away the heart and flavor that the original show had, and just do nothing as a result. The best way to sum up this show in a nutshell is that it feels like as if they're trying to do their own version of Camp Lazlo, because after all, the original series had similarities to Rocko's Modern Life. Let's do our own version of Camp Lazlo then. But Camp Lazlo at least has memorable characters, and they at least did things to distinct itself from Joe Murray's previous series. This show just wants to be in a summer camp because I don't know. It feels more like an obligation that they had to meet rather than something that they wanted to do. So they just threw something random together. And it really shows because the first major problem that I have with this show is that it's really boring. Currently, as a me reviewing various animated shows in Sean's network reviews so far, Kamp Koral is the 3rd most boring animated series that I've reviewed so far, behind the Tom and Jerry comedy show, and a series that I've yet to rewatch for a review, Alvin and the Chipmunks 2015. This is literally a show where barely anything happens for 11 minutes, and any semblance of a plot is heavily overshadowed by them throwing in random garbage to fill up the runtime. It's literally just camp-related shenanigans that was done by much better shows, such as, for example, Camp Lazlo, which was at least able to tell a coherent story for each of its episodes, and had a cast of characters that were memorable. The only thing that this show does is that it uses characters from the original show that you could literally watch in the original show. The only thing that this show does is that it makes random side characters from the original show into reoccurring characters in this show, which is sweet, I guess, but that's not enough to make this show entirely different. And as such, this show feels as dry as SpongeBob is when he's on land. I mean, Gnarly Narwhal is an entirely new character made for this show, but I wouldn't say that she's a very good character. Her entire character trait is that she's just a plot device to force in conflict that didn't even need to be there. And what's more, is that she barely gets any consequences for whatever she does in the series. And even when she ends up making her way into the original show, the same ended up happening with Something Narwhal This Way Comes in Upturn Girls.
Yeah, full disclosure, I'm going to be talking about some elements of this show that made its way into the main show, because if episodes of Dexter's Laboratory that involve Dial-M for Monkey and the Justice Friends count as episodes of those shows, I'm gonna discuss episodes of the main series that involve Kamp Koral characters.
She does the exact same thing of starting conflict and gets no consequences for it. And in the case of Upturn Girls, she does things that get her and Pearl into trouble, like causing an innocent person to get hurt and ruining a pair of shoes, and she gets no punishment in return. In fact, Pearl flat out condones her actions at the end and insults Lady Upturn. Basically, this episode is the entirety of the lesson taught in Cars 2, but condensed into 11 minutes. It doesn't matter if you're not from the city, you need to be on your best behavior in a new environment. And like I said in my original review on this show, the retcons have not gone away, so there's nothing new to bring up there, though them having the characters breathe underwater just shatters what the original series did to pieces. The original series didn't acknowledge that they were already underwater for a reason, because in essence, that would be them questioning everything else about their world. They don't even do it as some sort of joke in this show, like what Life of Crime did. They outright did it in a straightforward manner, which just flies in the face of what SpongeBob is all about. Speaking of what SpongeBob is supposed to be about, what about the comedy? I gotta ask, what comedy does this show even have? It's just exaggerated faces and characters clumsily bouncing around the screen for 11 minutes. It's exactly what the post-sequel episodes get stereotyped as. This on its own is not inherently a joke. It's just characters doing things, and anything that they do end up doing that is effective, they end up running into the ground to the point where it's just not funny anymore. Squidward getting hit by a loose floorboard everywhere is not inherently funny. At least, not without a setup. And this show seems to put a lot more emphasis on toilet humor than the main show used to. There is a surprising number of jokes that involve diapers, as well as the outhouse. If the Patrick Star Show is the franchise's substitute for making more weird and out there episodes than the main show, then Kamp Koral is the franchise's home for the gross out jokes. I can tell that this show is written by an entirely separate team than the main show and the Patrick Star Show, because while this show was still ongoing, there were episodes of the main show and even the Patrick Star Show that were able to get a laugh out of me. Nothing is able to beat the first 3 seasons in regards to comedy, but something that the recent seasons excel at is that it's able to do visual jokes and slapstick very well. Ain't That the Tooth and Hot Cross Nuts are some of my favorite episodes in the recent seasons because of how they excelled at doing slapstick and adult jokes, especially the former, because unlike Kamp Koral, it actually does set up well to ensure that its jokes land. With Kamp Koral, I can't tell if it's even trying to be funny most of the time, though that might be because of how visually dull this series is. Speaking of which, I've gone on record saying that the animation in Kamp Koral is uncanny and inconsistent a lot of the time, but in watching the rest of the series in preparations for this review, I found another major problem with this show. This series has a very similar problem as Teen Titans Go.
By the way, you know who you are. Before you decide to whisper, overdone topic, I'm only bringing up Teen Titans Go as an example and an example only.
Not in the sense that the animation itself is similar. That would be comparing apples to oranges at that point. The problem that this show has in regards to its animation is that whenever the series doesn't look incredibly unpolished or horrifying, the animation in this series is just so bland. And the culprit of the problem in particular is with the backgrounds. The best way to sum up how dull that Camp Koral, the location, is in this show is that this is straight up not a summer camp. Toll Drama Island, a show that was more about competition than camping, has a camp that looks more close to a camp than the one in this show. To describe the issue with the camp in this show looks like what happened in the Camp Laszlo episode Dirt Nappers, when Samson tried to clean the dirt all around Camp Kidney. He leaves a barren wasteland of nothing but dryness. In other words, the summer camp in this show is freaking boring. It barely resembles a camp at all. Instead, it looks more like a beach or desert than an actual summer camp. I get that this franchise is supposed to be set underwater, but not everything in the original series looked like a beach. The original series, for instance, had swamps that at least looked like swamps, and had forests that at least looked like a forest. And last I checked, Kelp Forest, which this series is presumably supposed to be set in, was covered by trees and is supposed to be darkly lit. And combining this with the fact that the color palette is incredibly washed out, makes the animation even more bland to look at. And no amount of exaggerated movements from the characters will be able to save the animation in the long run. I'm also not a fan of how they, instead of making 3D models for characters like the rest of Patrick's family, and the young versions of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, they just plastered the 2D versions into the show itself. Like, did they not have the money to make a 3D model or something? Like, even though, yes, these characters don't appear in more than one episode, that falls apart because Cecil Starr, as well as those burglars that appeared in some episodes of the main show, only have one episode in this show, and they had 3D models made for them, so that laziness here is inexcusable. Granted, the 2D animation of the characters is way better than the 3D animation, but still though. And whenever this show is not being a show about nothing, all they're doing is rehashing plots that we've already seen in the original, or they flat out make what happened in the original seem repetitive. Because you wonder why the characters don't stop and say in the original series, wait a minute, doesn't this whole situation look familiar? Like, I understand that the original series was known to have rehashed some of their episodes, even some post-sequel episodes have had this problem, and sometimes these rehash episodes are a lot better than the original episodes that they were copying off of. Hot Cross Nuts, for example, is a much better version of Krusty Dogs because things actually happen and there's more effort put into the adult jokes that it does. But with Camp Koral, this just emphasizes the fact that this series didn't even need to exist. Because it's obvious that they were struggling to come up with episode plots, so they just resorted to throwing in whatever random garbage that they could put in, or anything that they did do, they just took from the original series and added absolutely nothing new to it. Like, no joke, there's literally an episode where SpongeBob makes Bubble Buddy, which results in the exact same results as the original episode, and 9 times out of 10, a lot of these rehash episodes are a lot worse than the episodes that they're taking from, or are just fine at best, but nothing special. Hill Fu is basically Karate Choppers, but without Mr. Krabs intervening and threatening SpongeBob with the loss of something like a job. Night of the Living Stench is the Battle of Bikini Bottom with the roles reversed. Squidward is the one who wants to stay clean, while the other campers want to stay dirty. And the Jelly Life is basically Nature Pans. And other times, these rehash episodes bring in problems that weren't even in the episodes that they're copying off of. One such example being the episode Camp Cow, which is literally a direct ripoff of My Pretty Seahorse from the original series, and they didn't even try to hide it. The only differences are that the original episode is heartwarming, tells an actual story, grew a bond with SpongeBob and Mystery, and it's actually funny. Not to mention, that episode didn't have a running gag of characters wanting to step in horse droppings. This episode has exactly that with this sea cow that SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy befriends. It's a running gag throughout the episode that SpongeBob wants to step in it, because it's considered lucky, but that's not funny. That's just disgusting. Especially when at the end of the episode, he kisses his shoe. And no, I'm not showing either the footage or a picture of him doing this. Note to everyone watching this video, don't step in cow droppings. You're not gonna get money out of it. All you're going to end up with is a shoe that is contaminated and needs to get cleaned immediately to prevent cross-contamination. This episode doesn't come close to either Foot Brawl or Robo-Monkey Shines from Robot Boy, but it's definitely up there. But that's the thing about Kamp Koral, and why I struggled to find that much to say about it. It has very little substance, to the point where I'm just bored most of the time. Which is very strange, because the main show and the Patrick Star show have so much more substance than this show. Even as late as season 13 of the main series, they were able to offer much more interesting things to talk about, for better or for worse. Even what I consider the worst episode of this show, Squizzery, is a Squidward torture episode with one of the worst twist endings in the entire franchise. But that's not even unique to this show, because the main series has tortured Squidward so many times that it just takes away this show's last chance to have anything unique about it. And many of the problems that I have with this show would just resort to me talking about things from the main series. This show even ends badly, starting off the series finale with Kamp being over, with the rest of the episode having SpongeBob and Patrick being left behind as they goof around for 22 minutes, then needing to stop these burglars, then SpongeBob and Patrick being taken back home on the bus at the end of the episode. Like, there is a plotline with SpongeBob finally trying to catch a jellyfish, but the episode has all of this buried within the storyline of these burglars hiding the golden jewelry they stole in pies. So, instead of ending the show with a heartfelt goodbye to the camp, they ended the series with the Mr. Krabs is cheap joke, where he deliberately tries to make Patrick throw up in a bag of money, because he ends up puking out the golden jewelry that he ate. Because if Camp Lazlo has to have a very bad ending with summer being over, this show has to have a bad one as well. And since I don't have any plans on doing a review on the following thing I'm gonna talk about, and since it's technically a Kamp Koral reunion episode, I might as well talk about the Creepaway Camp special from the main series. The episode was advertised in August of 2024, and Nickelodeon was hyping this episode up to the point of giving us a preview of what it had in store. I decided to go ahead and give it a watch when it came out, and I gotta say, I was absolutely disappointed with this episode. Not because of any sort of bias that I have with Kamp Koral. I mean, I'm able to separate any show that I don't like when being combined with the show that I like. For example, I still love the OKKO episode, Crossover Nexus, despite the fact that I don't like Teen Titans Go or Ben 10 2017. But even putting the Kamp Koral stuff aside, this episode is not good. For the obvious factor being that it's the first special of the show in a very long time that is literally nothing but a ratings trap. They haven't had a ratings trap on this scale since SpongeBob You're Fired, because the specials that were released after that episode at least delivered what they promised. Even Goons on the Moon delivered what they promised more than this episode. This episode in specific advertised itself as both a Kamp Koral reunion episode, as well as a Halloween special, and they only really delivered one out of two of the things that it promised. That being that, yes, it is a reunion episode, but the Halloween aspect of it is so underwhelming, because they build it up as something Halloween related, but they then trick the audience by revealing that Elwood, that very strange kid from Kamp Koral, decided to bring all of them deep into the woods for a reunion party, because as it turns out, he got left behind on the last day of camp before Kamp Koral was abandoned. Essentially, this episode shares the exact same problem as iParty with Victorious from iCarly, where this episode is incredibly surface level in regards to what it's trying to do. There are some jokes that did admittedly get a laugh out of me.
Unlike most episodes of Kamp Koral, SpongeBob is still able to get a laugh out of me with the recent seasons.
My favorite one being the sequence where it looks like Plankton and Karen are kissing, only for it to reveal that Plankton was just playing a video game. But other than that, the main problem with this episode is that barely anything happens. All the episode is in its basic form is the characters getting captured one by one before the reveal comes around and we have a reunion party. And when the episode came to an end when I first watched it, I was thinking to myself, wait, that's it? Before I immediately thought about the decision of what rating I'd give this episode. Admittedly, season 14 was a very weak season, definitely the weakest of the post-sequel seasons of the main series, and out of every episode that came out of that season, while this episode is not the worst of them all, to me, those choices go to Sponge Chovy, Don't Make Me Laugh, Bassword, and Squidiot Box. This episode is easily the most disappointing out of all of them. But overall, as I stated in my original review on Kamp Koral, this show is harmless. It's still not a good show, for the fact that it's very pointless, makes retcons to the original series, and is very dull. But out of all the shows I have and will review so far, you can do a lot worse than this show. But that's the thing. A boring show is always going to be less fun to talk about than a show that is frustrating, because you can at least feel something while watching it. While watching Kamp Koral, on the other hand, the only thing I wish I could do is watch something that is much more entertaining than it. In early 2021, it was announced that SpongeBob was getting not one, but 2 spin-off shows. One series was named Kamp Koral,
which I talked about last time in production order,
and the subject of today's review, the Patrick Star Show. Going into this series, I was not looking forward to watching this one, because just looking at the promotional material for myself gave me some red flags, and also, I've seen the results for a ton of spin-offs regarding characters that failed miserably. So going in, I was honestly expecting this show to end up being the same, and after watching it, do I have the same opinion of the show? Well, that will be the discussion for after I begin this review. What is this show about? Well, as the theme song says, Patrick, whom is presumably younger, lives with his parents. This is his dad, this is his mom, this is his sister,
she's shy,
this is his grandpa, this is his room, and this is his show, which he basically does for a group of people that sit on his lawn, and many wacky deep-sea adventures happen from there. Now, to start off this review, I'm going to begin with a bit of a confession. Going into this show, I was actually dreading it a lot, because of the fact that, a lot like Kamp Koral, there are a lot of retcons that this show makes from the original series right off the bat. For starters, we already got the designs of what Patrick's parents look like in the original show, specifically in the episode I'm With Stupid, specifically at the end of the episode, and we already know who Patrick's sister is supposed to be, which is Sister Sam, but instead, Patrick Star's sister is basically Squidina, which is questionable right out the gate, because Squidina is a squid and not a starfish. But not to sound like Bubble Bass from one episode that I'll be discussing about in this review, another thing that could have made or broken this show to pieces is the concept of spin-offs regarding characters that are meant to be the comic relief characters. This show could have either been executed surprisingly well or been a colossal disaster, because very rarely does this kind of product ever work out. There are some that could work, such as Timon and Pumbaa or the Penguins of Madagascar, which basically took the continuity of the original films that they were based on and turned them upside down, to the point where them being tied to the original films were thrown out the window for the purpose of being comedic. But then there are others like Planet Sheen, Cars 2, and the Minions movie, which basically take characters that are supposed to share the spotlight and not take center stage, making their one gimmick tire out completely. And regarding the Patrick Star Show, when you do this, you are walking a tightrope. So, in early July of 2021, I watched the first episode, and what are my thoughts on it? Surprisingly, I actually ended up liking this show. I don't know if it was because at the time of 2021, I went through several bad shows that made this show feel refreshing in comparison, or because of a certain situation I was dealing with at the time. But no, this show was actually surprisingly good. And why is that? Well, the best way to sum up this show is through this comparison. This series reminds me of Timon and Pumbaa.
Ironically enough, I brought up that show as an example just a second ago.
And the fact that this show compensates for the premise of this show only having a comic relief to work with by throwing in elements that are so out there, even surpassing the standards of what were set up by the movie that they were based on, while at the exact same time, regarding the continuity issues that this show has, coming up with the headcanon that I had in mind. This show is clearly set in an alternate universe where anything can happen, similarly to the Penguins of Madagascar, because this show is far more insane than the original series. Like, if Kamp Koral is basically an attempt to be Kamp Laszlo, this show is basically the attempt to be Rocco's Modern Life. But logic is thrown out the window far more in this show than Rocco, because that show does have some moments where it does feel grounded in some way, while the Patrick Star show does not. But I do think that this works in this show's favor. You see, the problem that I had with Kamp Koral is that it seems to have wanted to be taken more seriously as a prequel to the original show, but it failed massively, especially with how it handled time travel. The Patrick Star show makes it clear that you're not supposed to take it super seriously, but that does make this show a lot more forgivable as a result. Especially because, unlike Kamp Koral, this show tries to be its own thing for the most part. And it really does show that a lot of the people who worked on this series really did care about making this show entertaining. Because one strength that this show excels at the most is its comedy and writing. Now granted, it's not seasons 1 to 3 of the main show, but the humor works in its own way. The best way to sum up the humor in this show is that it's like the humor from the recent seasons of the main show mixed with something like Back at the Barnyard, meaning that a lot of the humor that the show is trying to go for is very random, but it's the kind of random that elevates the show to the status of being generally funny. And like I said at the beginning of this video, there was a possibility that this show could have ended up falling apart entirely, because there's no way that Patrick Star could work on his own without someone else to bounce off of, but this show manages to do this with flying colors, mostly. And the factor being that the entire Star family is so blind to the world around them that they end up ruining things for others also elevates the level of comedy to another level as well. Where with the episodes in season 6 to 8, they generally had an issue in regards to not knowing which characters they should punish or reward, this show and even some of the recent seasons have generally fixed this, where some episodes do put on this Looney Tunes scenario where the antagonist wants to do something to the innocent person, but the innocent one ends up coming out on top. The Big Bad Bubble Bass is an example of this, but the Patrick Star show had also done this. Sometimes it doesn't work, like in Gas Station Vacation, where the Star family ends up pestering and terrorizing people at a gas station because they think it's a resort, but there are other times where they do succeed. Star Cruise, for example, has them unknowingly defeating a bunch of aliens because they think it's a cruise ship. And one of my favorite episodes that shows off this show's sense of humor is Face/Off Model, where Patrick's face ends up looking very weird for the whole episode because he swapped himself out for an off-model version of his design because he wanted to try the future's version of pancakes. And through the process of this, they stumble upon a version of Patrick that very much takes a jab at Steven Universe, and that was a very sick burn right there that shows that Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network are still very much rivals to one another, as well as Bubble Bass reviews, which also takes jabs at internet critics, specifically the ones that took their hate for a specific product, up to a point where they went out of their way to attack the writers and creators of the show in particular. Most internet critics don't do this anymore. The last time that I recall it getting this bad was in 2014 when one of these critics took his hate for Pet Sir to Pat up to a point of unintentionally and indirectly causing his fans to attack the writer of the episode, but that version of him is thankfully gone now, and the newer version of himself is a lot better than he was back then, though this does still happen from time to time. One individual who frequently does this is a culture war brony who takes his hatred for the Star Wars sequel trilogy too far, to the point where he frequently attacks the people behind them in his videos. And in regards to this episode, Bubble Bass is basically dressed up as the nostalgia critic and basically over-exaggerates how bad that the show actually is, basically using inflections that the nostalgia critic used in the past. But I don't think that this episode is specifically trying to take jabs at one critic in specific. This episode is trying to parody any type of critic that basically does what Bubble Bass does in this episode. Heck, I'll even do an impression of one of them. Every one of these movies in the Star Wars sequel trilogy should be tossed in a dumpster and set on fire. The Star Wars sequel trilogy is a crime against humanity, and everyone involved with it should be thrown in jail. Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams for directing it, Kathleen Kennedy for producing it, and the brain-dead morons for watching it. I'm just glad my audience is not that pathetic. Right, fellas? But with that being said though, the Patrick Star Show has a lot of problems on his sleeve. It's not really a big deal in regards to this show, because like I said, this show is set up in a way where it doesn't want you to take it too seriously, as opposed to other shows I reviewed like Eat the Cat or Kappa Mikey. But to be the bubble bast real quick in regards to this show's issues, I'm going to start off with these pointers. While yes, this show is miles better than Planet Sheen, because this show at least tries to have fun, while remembering the type of show that it's supposed to be. It has pretty similar issues, all things considered, as it does come at a point where the show falls into way too familiar territories with the original show. Granted, it's not as bad in this show as it is in Kamp Koral, because it's not like the Patrick Star Show exactly has copy and pasted stories from the main show, although the episode Chum Bucket List is basically dying for pie but with chum instead of an exploding pie, and SpongeBob and Patrick don't treat it like a dire situation. No, what I mean by way too familiar territories, I'm talking about the fact that certain elements do feel like they want to be like something from the original show, but they don't really commit to it. Feeling as if this show really wants to be SpongeBob SquarePants, but without SpongeBob SquarePants, instead of being its own show. Even though that's what this show does a lot of the time in the first place, so some of these elements that they throw in are completely unnecessary. Let's start off small with the animation. A lot of people have given SpongeBob criticisms in recent years, saying that this show is over-animated a lot of the time, to the point where it gets annoying. I highly disagree on this, because while yes, the show does have moments where they go too far with the animation being overtly expressive, to the point of being annoying, such as in episodes like the Nitwitting and Boss for a Day, the animation does at least know when to calm down at certain points, so that it doesn't get annoying, whereas in shows like Cocomelon, Power Players, and Thundercats Roar, they don't have any moments of downtime to give the characters a moment to breathe. They always had to shake or move the camera around, or have the characters move in some way, causing the shows to become distracting to watch. The recent seasons of SpongeBob do still have moments of downtime outside of them doing expressions. It sort of gives me a Ren and Stimpy feeling, which does make sense, since some of those who currently work on the show did work on the original Ren and Stimpy at one point, and this exact same thing applies to the Patrick Star Show, but that's honestly where the issue regarding the animation comes in. It's point for point, the exact same animation that the main show does. The only difference being that some of those who worked on the show in seasons 11 to 12 moved to the Patrick Star Show, which is why seasons 13 to now are a lot more toned down in comparison. But that's where the problem comes in. The animation hardly does anything to really distinct itself from the main show, outside of the animation being more exaggerated in one than the other, which is strange because this show does have points where they do use different styles of animation, such as stop motion and rubber hose animation in a select few episodes. So it is a bit of a questionable decision why they didn't do that in regards to this show, because you could literally take a frame from a random episode of this show and compare it to a frame from one of the recent episodes of the main show, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. The only thing distincting this series from the main show is that the sky is a different color and there are stars in it now, and that Patrick has different clothes now. Then again, the Patrick Star Show is not the only series for Sean's Network Reviews that has this problem. The Boom Crew has this exact same problem. Every single character in that show looks like they belong in the Proud Family, rather than an entirely different show, despite being made by the same people who also created that show. But I'll get to the Boom Crew when I get to that show at a later point. And besides the animation in this show, this exact same thing applies to the characters. Take for instance, this show a lot of the time has its own stand-in for Squidward,
even though Squidward is already in this show, but he's now a paperboy who delivers newspapers to houses.
But this show's stand-in for Squidward is Granny Tentacles, whom has the exact same design as Squidward's mom from the main series, but they basically changed her into Squidward's grandmother. So this would end up causing confusion if you didn't know this tiny piece of information before going into this show. Meanwhile, in the main series, they basically changed her design to make Squidward's mom look younger, but what they did to Squidward's grandmother in this show is that they literally made her into a gender flip / elder early version of Squidward, but she's hardly ever utilized in this show. It's said a few times that she's dating Grandpat in the show, but that's background information at most. And because of the fact that Granny Tentacles basically fills the Squidward role of being the grouchy neighbor, the show likes to hit her with the karma stick more often than not, whenever she very rarely shows up. But if I'm being honest, this is a decision that I can see many people not liking for a multitude of reasons. One of the obvious reasons being that it could be a lot harder to watch than what happens to Squidward in the main show. Because think about everything that happens to Squidward in the main series. Now, even at points where the treatment towards him is at its absolute worst, Squidward is a young adult. Would I want that young adult to be tortured? Well, if it's undeserved like what we were given in episodes like Boating Buddies or Choir Boys, absolutely not. But regardless of that, Squidward is an adult. Now, if a lot of this stuff happened to a child or an elderly person, that's a different story entirely. That was also a problem that I had with Squizzery from Kamp Koral in particular. It was not only a Squidward torture episode, but it was a torture episode for a child version of him. And that's basically what this show does with Granny Tentacles more often than not, whenever she shows up. She's either the punching bag, or she's generally there to fill in the shoes of Squidward, despite the fact that Squidward is already in this show, and Granny Tentacles is literally a clone of him. We've seen this happen in the award show episode, where a bunch of guys set up spotlights around her house and basically blind her in the process. And in one of my least favorite episodes of the show so far, Get Off My Lawny, Patrick's audience of random citizens try to bug her for the entire episode, not taking a hint that she wants to be left alone, until she's forced to cave into entertaining them when Patrick and Squidina attempt to use her for their own personal gain, only for everything that she went through in the entire episode to be completely pointless. Next problem that I have with this show is, believe it or not, Patrick. Well, he's not as bad in this show as he was in season 6 to 8 of the main series, nor is there anything worth noting about him in this show. A problem that Patrick has in this show is that they completely sanded him down to the point where he's just one-dimensional now. In the first 3 seasons of the main show, Patrick could be described as lovable and dumb. There was a lot more to him in the show than just him eating. In this show, on the other hand, he's not necessarily unlikable, but there's only really one trait that he has in this show now, and that is the fact that he likes to eat, and that's all he really ever thinks about in this show. They really did sand down a lot of his personality traits from the main show, and him thinking about nothing but food really does lead to a lot of the problems in the show itself, such as in another one of my least favorite episodes, Tying the Clop Knot, where he basically alters time, making Bunny and Cecil miserable in the process, and having to remake the wedding between both of them, all because he wanted cake, and Patrick attempts to eat the cake again near the end of the episode, not caring a single bit that he was the entire reason as to why they had to go through the tedious process of remaking the Clop Knot wedding in the first place. And when we don't get these particular moments of Patrick's one-dimensional character trait, it's basically a TV show with Squidina. Nothing really notable to point out there, but something notable that I should point out is that Patrick is so sentimental to his baby things that he was willing to act like a baby throughout an episode to keep them. The episode in specific being Big Baby Patrick, another one of my least favorite episodes of the show. Now, I'm not one to write off something for being aimed at a younger demographic. A lot of people write off the recent seasons of the main show for that exact reason, but in all honesty, just because something is aimed at a younger demographic, that doesn't inherently mean that it's written in a way that is immature. There are several shows and movies that are written in a way where they're a lot more mature than people give them credit for. And the show doesn't inherently have to not have mature themes to be considered immature. But with that being said though, it's episodes like Big Baby Patrick from this show that shows the stereotype as to why people view animation like this and how you're too old to like shows like this. This episode is just cringe-inducing to watch, for a reason that is very obvious. Patrick is acting like a literal infant, all because his parents are wanting him to give up his baby things, and that's all the explanations that were given. It's basically a worse version of Kid Schnitzel from Chowder, but that episode at least had some funny moments, like Mung Dahl acting cool, and the fourth wall moment where Chowder calls Schnitzel out for cursing, and that's already what I considered one of the worst episodes of that show as well. Even the motivation of that episode was better, as the reason as to why Chowder and Schnitzel acted like babies was because Schnitzel was getting exhausted with what was going on at the catering company, which was understandable because a lot of the time, he does get pushed around. Here though, Patrick acts like a baby because he doesn't want to give up his baby things, and this plot point is not even so much as mentioned at the end of the episode. After the entire family end up acting like babies, and turn back to normal when they play a game of acting like grown-ups, the episode just immediately puts focus on Grandpat acting like a baby before Patrick drops Grandpat at the orphanage. The whole motive of the episode is completely dropped, so basically, it's just a cringe-inducing episode where the entire motive is that the main character doesn't want to give up his baby things, but it's completely dropped after Patrick goes to Goofy Goobers with SpongeBob, and the entirety of the episode was completely pointless. Now, despite the fact that I am an adult, I don't feel shame or embarrassment towards the fact that I have and still do love SpongeBob, and I do like this show and plenty of other shows that I reviewed. However, this episode is what I consider cringe-inducing, in a similar vein as Momageddon from the main show, because a lot of what the characters do in these episodes is something that I would actively consider as being embarrassing, but that episode at least had potential to be good. Meanwhile, this episode, just no. And since I don't have any plans on reviewing this in particular, I might as well talk about the Title Zone special, since Grandpat from this show is what connects all of these episodes in this special event all together, meaning that yes, I am going to be talking about something Kamp Koral related again, in the main series as well. This special came out at the beginning of 2023, but due to the fact that I don't watch live TV anymore, and I didn't have cable since 2021, it took me a while to get around to this special, and when I got Paramount Plus in the summer of 2023, I gave this special a watch, and wow, this special is very, very bad. Like, as much as I didn't find the Creepaway Camp special to be very good, at least it offered what it promised, making it to where it wasn't the worst of the post-sequel specials. The title for being the worst of them all actually belongs to this special right here, because Nickelodeon advertised this event as being a crossover between the three of these shows, but in actuality, they lied. This event was an absolute ratings trap, because not once did they ever have these three shows cross over with each other. The only thing connecting these 4 episodes together is that Grandpat would appear in the episodes at certain points, but that's so surface level that it's not enough to make the special feel like a legitimate crossover. In all honesty, this special reminds me of that Cartoon Network Invaded event that Cartoon Network did, where they basically had all their shows at the time have an episode that was about the main character suspecting that an alien was actually an alien, and 4 out of 5 of the episodes were about the exact same thing. But give that special this, they at least did more with it than just the Twilight Zone parody, and there were Easter eggs connecting the 5 of them together. These 4 episodes don't even have this. They're all just regular episodes that could have and had already been detached from each other as their own separate episodes, and they would be the exact same. As episodes on their own, they are admittedly not the worst things ever, because all 3 shows have put out worse episodes. The worst of the 4 of these episodes is You're Going to Pay Phone, because it's 11 minutes of Mr. Krabs being hypnotized to do something that he wouldn't do, while the best one is Shrinking Stars, because it actually tells a coherent story and interesting things actually happen, while the other ones have major problems or are uninteresting. Welcome to Binary Bottom has a bare-bones plotline of the main characters being robots, and when the story actually gets started, it turns into a chase sequence for the rest of the episode. The Switch Glitch is your standard bland episode of Kamp Koral, and A Skin Wrinkle in Time is so bare bones and it hardly really counts as a full-length episode. However, when you take into account that all these episodes were advertised as a crossover special, that just makes this special even worse, and it makes it all the way up there with Atlantis SquarePants, Truth or Square, and SpongeBob You're Fired as one of the biggest ratings traps that the show had ever done. And the fact that the special is using the title zone is not even unique, because there were already episodes in the main show that had already done this before. No pictures, please.
One of my least favorite episodes is season 11,
And The Night Patty,
an episode I consider great.
and these 4 episodes don't do anything different from those 2 besides the inclusion of Grandpad. It really does feel like a last-minute decision to have these elements be included, because when I think of crossovers, I think of things like the Jimmy Timmy Power Hours, Crossover Nexus, the DuckTales 2017 Darkwing Duck Special, etc. Not this! That one episode of Kamp Koral where Cecil Star becomes the counselor of Kamp Koral feels more like a crossover episode than this entire special does. But to make sure that this review doesn't end out on a downer note, I will say that I do like this show so far, at least as of me watching the first 2 seasons.
Season 3 is not available on Paramount Plus at the moment.
But I will say that I prefer this show over Thundercats Roar, Robot Boy, and the previous show I reviewed in production order. But I'm saying this as of the time that this show is still going on while I'm writing this script. I may do a full-length Sean's Network Reviews video on this show when this show completes its run, if I have more to say about it, but I'll be holding my breath on that for now. Though I am probably giving out unpopular opinions, because from what I've been hearing, this show has been getting just as much hate as Kamp Koral, though I can't argue with subjectivity. But if I could end out this review with something, guys, Steven Hillenburg never stated that he didn't want spin-offs. He just said that he didn't see the idea of them happening. And according to Vincent Waller, the current showrunner, Steve was aware of Kamp Koral's existence, and this was confirmed long after Nickelodeon was given backlash for this. TLDR, it's very disrespectful to put words in a dead man's mouth. Well, prepare to hear the first and last time that I talk about this one. Today we're going to be talking about Tom and Jerry again. More specifically, the third and final era of the long run of theatrical Tom and Jerry shorts, after the golden age with William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, and the dark age with the Gene Deitch shorts, before Tom and Jerry ended up having to move to television in another dark era before being given ups and downs. In the mystical year of 1963, we got this era of shorts directed by famous animator Chuck Jones. And it's also the finale of this particular era. Are the Chuck Jones shorts as good as the William Hanna and Joseph Barbera era? Or is it as bad as the Gene Deitch era? Honestly speaking, and full disclosure, this is going to be a very short episode, but I find the Chuck Jones era to just be in the middle. To bring out a very broad comparison in describing how the theatrical phase of Tom and Jerry was like, similarly to a show like SpongeBob SquarePants, Tom and Jerry was divided into at least 3 separate eras. The golden age being the Hanna-Barbera and Joseph Barbera era, being the franchise's equivalent of seasons 1 to 3 of SpongeBob, the Gene Deitch era being the equivalent of seasons 6 to 8, and well, the best way to sum up the Chuck Jones shorts is that it's definitely this franchise's equivalent of seasons 4 and 5, as well as the first half of season 9, in the sense where, even though the Chuck Jones era doesn't come close to the golden era,
I don't think that any other Tom and Jerry thing comes close to it.
it does have the sense where it at least has the Tom and Jerry magic in it, which is more than I can say with the Gene Deitch era. Though, the reason as to why this review is going to be as short as it is because speaking personally, after binging every single short on Tubi in order to write this script, I honestly don't have all that much to really say about it. It's basically what you get with the product that revolves around Tom and Jerry, although it's not nearly as funny, because the timing is a lot more sluggish than it was in the golden era, but it doesn't have any frustrating elements like some of the Tom and Jerry things that I talked about, which is definitely a plus, so these segments are watchable. And I was able to watch through every episode without issue, which made things a lot easier, and I will say that the animation in these segments are really good. They are done by Chuck Jones after all, whom is very well known for his work on Looney Tunes and most famously, The Grinch. The animation in these shorts are especially good when you watch it on an HD TV with how crisp that everything feels, though there are some parts where it does feel like they're just recycling animation from the golden age, and the animation in at least 2 of these segments are drastically different than it is in the rest of this era. Although, in comparison to what we got with the Gene Deitch shorts shorts, these shorts are a significant improvement. And even though, yes, I didn't really have a lot of things to really say about these shorts, I am glad that I got to watch through them to see what I think about them. And out of everything that I reviewed so far, the Chuck Jones shorts are probably the best out of all the shows or shorts that I just find okay. And before Tom and Jerry Tales came out, this was the one that I could confidently say are probably the best that we got to see from Tom and Jerry for a while. Though I've yet to have binge watched Tom and Jerry Kids, but I'll see what I think about that show when I get around to it at a later date. But overall, the Chuck Jones Tom and Jerry shorts are just okay. So, I've been asked this question by quite a few people. Will you be giving a review to some of the other Tom and Jerry products for your review series? And my answer to that would always be that it's a definite maybe. Because a quick update for my Sean's Network reviews, I added a bunch of shows that I'll be taking a look at sometime in the future to a giant list of shows in 2 categories. There are some shows that I am currently marathoning by the time that I'm writing this script, called Lyoko and Kappa-Mikey, as well as Kuku Hirajuku, but I'm holding on marathoning the rest of that for now. Those shows are pretty long though, but I made enough space to where I can simultaneously marathon another show in the meantime, because I organized the list into 2 separate categories, and by the number of episodes that they were given, since some of the earlier shows in both of these categories are extremely short. I won't need to worry about making certain reviews extremely long like some other reviews I've been doing as of recently. As a quick reminder, I'm watching each and every single episode of these shows to prepare for reviews, so my points could be on point and I would be able to know about a lot of things about the shows in general. And considering the very short amount of episodes of some of the earlier shows that I'm considering reviewing in both of these categories that I'll go in a pattern with, it won't take too long to finish all of the episodes of these shows. And in particular, one of the first shows besides Middle School Moguls that I threw into one of these categories was the Gene Deitch Tom and Jerry shorts. The only other show that it was in competition with was Aquaman King of Atlantis, but since the Gene Deitch Tom and Jerry shorts beat it out on the Wheel of Names, it's the subject for today's review. But since I'm going in a pattern with both of these categories, I'll be saving that show for later to see what I think about it. But we're on the Gene Deitch Tom and Jerry shorts today. When these shorts came out initially, they were hated. Like, beyond hated. In fact, they grew such a large amount of hate that they now live in infamy. These shorts even had the reputation of being the worst thing to ever come out of Tom and Jerry. That is until the 1975 Tom and Jerry series came out, the Tom and Jerry 1992 movie came out, and the Tom and Jerry crossover movies came out. And yes, while there are a lot of aspects to not like this era for, some other aspects are kind of overblown due to public perception. And since the director and one who gave his input on these cartoons, Gene Deitch, is dead, I want to be as nice as possible because he did some pretty good things in his lifetime, as he also contributed to Popeye, another classic cartoon icon. Throughout this Sean's Network Reviews series, I've been giving out my share of unpopular opinions, whether the shows in particular are generally liked or have mixed reception. And I'm going to have to unfortunately give out another unpopular opinion. The hate was overblown for this era of Tom and Jerry. Actually, that is starting to become the standard opinion about the Gene Deitch Tom and Jerry cartoons, that the hate was overblown for them. I'm not saying that these cartoons are good by all means necessary, obviously not. I still think that in general, the Gene Deitch Tom and Jerry shorts is pretty low on my rankings towards shows that I reviewed for Sean's Network reviews, but I've seen some people say that the Gene Deitch cartoons are so bad that they are the worst in Tom and Jerry's history besides most of their films. Considering the other things that came out of the franchise, these shorts are probably some of the least egregious stuff that you'll see in the entire franchise, as they do have some understanding to what made the original Tom and Jerry shorts work for the most part. I'll get to the things that don't work about these shorts shortly. And in terms of some of these shorts, if you're able to look hard enough, you'll be able to find some notable gems that, if they were made in the Hanna-Barbera era of Tom and Jerry shorts, they would have definitely fit in perfectly with them. They would definitely have to be reworked a little bit to make the animation a lot better and get rid of Clint Clobber or rewrite him to make him not as abusive. But regardless, the pieces are here, and there was a bit of an attempt to get on the same level of atmosphere as the original shorts. They just came up short for a lot of reasons, and the music is still relaxing, just like in the original Tom and Jerry cartoons. My favorite of these shorts is the Tom and Jerry cartoon kit, as it's very experimental, and unlike Thundercats Roar, this short has an excuse to why it doesn't have any backgrounds, as the entire cartoon short is just an experiment. And also, here's something else that I like about these shorts that gives them advantage over some other Tom and Jerry products. For the most part, Tom is usually the one that instigates Jerry going after him, and this time around, Tom actually does things to deserve Jerry going after him. Are there some points where this problem happens? Oh yes, most definitely, and I'll go into that shortly as well, but every other time, this is completely non-existent in the series, and it's not nearly as bad here as in that other show, but that's where my praise ends. Let's start off with one of the more obvious issues with this era of Tom and Jerry, the animation. It's not the worst Tom and Jerry animation ever. Honestly, the Tom and Jerry comedy show is worse in this regard, but the Gene Deitch Tom and Jerry shorts are very close. I don't know if it's just me, but something just doesn't feel right with the animation on display here. Even when I was little, I remember not liking these shorts all that much, and found that there was just something not right with these shorts. But now I figured it out. The animation in general feels very janky, and it just doesn't fit with Tom and Jerry in the slightest. Because Tom and Jerry as a franchise is revolved entirely around slapstick, which requires energized timing and attention to detail. The slapstick and timing in these shorts are very slow, which removes the momentum of the timing, and that's a huge shame because if you can ignore all the other aspects of the animation, the character designs actually look pretty nice, as they take after UPA shorts in the veins of something like Mr. Magoo or Gerald McBoing Boing, where the designs look simplistic, thus making more room for the animation to be cartoony, which is fitting since Tom and Jerry is slapstick driven, and it's coincidental as Gene Deitch did some works on UPA shorts for television, so going more cartoony does help. It's the poor execution that cancels out these otherwise pretty decent designs. As I said, because the animation is very janky and the slapstick is very slow, the jokes in this collection of shorts ends up falling flat on their face. And considering the fact that these shorts were able to be released in theaters with more freedom in the budget to make the animation a lot smoother, these shorts have even less of an excuse than the Tom and Jerry comedy show did. I heard that the reason why these shorts ended up being like this was both because of the fact that MGM outsourced the animation to Czechoslovakia, and these shorts were made in the span of a week. But there's just no excuse for this level of quality in the slightest.
With designs that are this simplistic,
and props that are not even that detailed, there would obviously be more room in making sure that the actual animation would make up for these particular designs, as in making the movements at least smooth, and make the timing at the very least land well to make the jokes effective. But no, they don't do that. As for how the shorts are in particular, they're alright for what they are, with the exception of a few problems that I'll be getting to shortly with how Tom is treated in a select few shorts and Tom's owner. There are quite a few things that these shorts do that if they were in the original era, they would have definitely fit in. But there is one thing that would definitely need to be fixed up majorly, and that is the sound effects. Landing Stripling is the worst in this regard because they thought it would be a good idea to give this yellow bird a bunch of echo sound effects. They also appear in other episodes for the record, but not nearly as bad. And while the majority of these shorts do have Tom being tormented by Jerry for at least a reason that is set up, some other shorts in this era completely forgets that you're supposed to actually have a reason for a character to do these things to the other, such as in Calypso Cat, where Jerry decides to ruin Tom's chances with this female cat because, well, Tom decided not to let Jerry come with him onto the boat. I mean, yeah, that was kind of selfish for Tom to do, but that's not a good reason to ruin Tom's time on the boat with this female cat. Like, you seriously can't say with a straight face that simply not letting someone onto a boat with you is as bad as directly pushing someone from being able to go into a car, or throwing the person that saved your life under the bus after giving you a warm home. All Tom really did here was close the window to keep Jerry from getting onto the boat. The horror, someone wants to be left alone and wants nothing to do with you. And Jerry also decides to torment Tom for not letting Jerry get a hold of one of the stakes in High Stakes. It would be one thing if Tom was eating something and he didn't share anything with Jerry. That's why Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Mouse from the original era worked. Tom refused to share his milk with Jerry, leading to Tom digging himself a bigger hole. But in High Stakes, Tom doesn't want to share the stakes with Jerry for a very good reason, that being the fact that his owner would pummel him. But other than those two appearances, Jerry is not that awful in this era of Tom and Jerry. He's way worse than the Tom and Jerry comedy show. No, if there's any character to hate in this era of Tom and Jerry, it's definitely Clint Clobber. Here's a little piece of info that I found when doing research on this 13 Shorts era of Tom and Jerry. All three of the shorts where Clint Clobber appears are rarely shown on Cartoon Network and Boomerang because of, and I quote, insensitive material and depictions of animal abuse. And that was honestly an understandable move right there, because everything that was ever said about this character is completely true. What I said back in my Tom and Jerry comedy show review about Clint Clobber being the worst owner in all of Tom and Jerry is true today, and I still hold these feelings. Clint Clobber is just one heck of an abusive person, particularly towards animals, more specifically Tom. Even if your hypothetical pet did something bad, you should realize that they're just an animal and they aren't as intelligent as we humans are. Well, Clint Clobber doesn't know about that, and in all three of his appearances, he goes overboard with it, to a point where he manages to get into the ranks of being the worst owner in all of Tom and Jerry in just 3 shorts. The owners from the Tom and Jerry comedy show had their appearances be in most episodes of that show, and there were 15 half-hour episodes of that series, and Clint Clobber manages to be worse than those owners in just 3 of these shorts, which only clock around 6 or 7 minutes. Right out the gate in his first appearance, when Tom accidentally hits him in the head with a frying pan, he continuously hits Tom with that same frying pan multiple times and gleefully stomps on Tom's hand while he screams in agony because he thinks that Tom is pushing on the gas pedal. And both of these actions are extremely difficult to recover from. And guess what? He doesn't recover or get better at all. He actually ends up getting even worse. In the next short he appears in, High Stakes, when he assumes that Tom was playing around with him when a shuttlecock flies into his mouth, he flips out at Tom for it. He forces pop down Tom's throat when he assumes that Tom spilled some pop onto the steak, and ties him onto a chair, not even being concerned about the fact that his cat could have drowned, and more on the fact that his meal was ruined. And in his last appearance, sorry Safari, he's selfishly more concerned by the fact that Tom is messing with his gun than Tom's safety. He beat up his pet when he accidentally got himself and his owner knocked off the elephant, and purposefully crushed Tom's fingers when he went through the lunchbox when looking for Jerry. And this is his last appearance in this era of Tom and Jerry and the entire franchise. Well, all I will say when it comes to this episode and it being Clint Clobber's final appearance is good riddance, you jerk. You will be missed by no one. Yeah, Tom's other owners have beaten up Tom as well, but the most that they would do is knock Tom in the head with a broom or force feed him something that makes him throw up. But they wouldn't even be shown on screen doing these things. The most that they would do is show the hand or just the broom. But in these shorts, you actually do see Clint Clobber physically hurting Tom over what was unintentional. And for all we know, he probably doesn't even know if Tom knows any better. So he would probably get like this even if it was just for a normal cat. But overall, the Gene Deitch era of Tom and Jerry was not very good. In Sean's network reviews, I wouldn't put this show nearly as bad as the Tom and Jerry comedy show, because not only are the owners in that show bad, it literally had nothing that people came to like about Tom and Jerry. Not even the music in that show was good. And it's also a little better than Ollie's Pack, because I was at least able to find some things to like in this era when ignoring the big Clint Clobber in the room. But I definitely put it as worse than Kamp, Koral and middle school moguls because of the pet abuse, and I found some more shorts that I didn't like in this era than just the 4 that I mentioned. Even though I'm probably never going to watch these shorts ever again, I definitely wouldn't put it as the worst Tom and Jerry thing ever. I would definitely take this over the Tom and Jerry comedy show and Tom and Jerry Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory any day of the week, because there was some passion put into it, and it does have an understanding of how Tom and Jerry works. But given the choice, out of the Tom and Jerry products that relies entirely around slapstick, this one is second only to the Tom and Jerry comedy show, and being the worst out of the Tom and Jerry shows that use slapstick and only on slapstick. So, today I'm going to be doing something a little different. Now, normally for Sean's Thoughts, as you've seen with the other things I reviewed so far while using the Sean's Thoughts branding, I'd usually cover animated shows that have yet to have completed their run, since the other series that it's connected to, Sean's Network Reviews, is primarily for shows that have completed their run. Shows like Thundercats Roar and Ollie's Pack just got particularly lucky because the initial scripts that I wrote for them were when the shows were still ongoing, and I didn't watch enough episodes to sustain a review, especially considering the fact that in my scripts for my initial reviews that I wrote for them, I didn't really have the names of the characters in my head yet, since I didn't watch those shows in their entirety at the time. But when it came up to the point where I did my initial review on Kamp Koral, which only had 6 episodes at the time, I came up with this new series to do for shows that are currently airing, and my general rule is if I have more to say about the show after they completed their run, and watch through the rest of the episodes that were aired after I originally reviewed them, I'd make a follow-up review if I have new things to say. Well, today for Sean's Thoughts, I'm actually going to be doing something very different, and that I am going to be doing a Sean's Yearly Reviews video. However, it's going to be using the Sean's Thoughts branding, for an entirely different reason as to why the Sean's Network Reviews video for shows that haven't completed their run use the Sean's Thoughts branding, because well, yes, the movies that I review for Sean's Yearly Reviews are only one movie, so you only have an hour of material to work with. At the same time, though, a lot of the movies that I reviewed for Sean's Yearly Reviews have been released on home media, digital, and are generally easy to get the materials to do a review on them. But the movie that I'm currently doing a review on is currently in theaters as of the time that I'm scripting this, and the materials are not easy to get the footage or pictures of. I could get the materials for the review through camera-recorded versions, but because I don't want to run into issues where I'm bombarded with pop-ups through a certain website in particular, I think it would be better if I do the review this way. So that way, I can basically do this review without needing to worry about getting the materials from the movie itself. And also, I don't want to let my fresh knowledge about the subject of today's review go to waste. Given that in preparations for me going into this remake, I decided to rewatch the original movie so that I had a frame of reference for what would happen in the remake, and then draw the comparisons in my head. When it comes to my thoughts on the original Lilo and Stitch movie, I think it goes without saying, this movie is not just a good movie, but also, it's a great movie, that remains as one of Disney's most important animated films of all time, considering the fact that by the time that the movie came out, Disney was struggling hard financially, with films like Treasure Planet and Home on the Range doing very poorly at the box office, and the original movie did very well for a very good reason. While I don't have as much nostalgia for this movie as I did with something like The Lion King or Finding Nemo, because I remember not really getting into this movie when I was little, but I fully gave it a chance when I was 12. It remains as an endearing movie with a very touching bond between two sisters, as well as having a well-executed story, where even though yes, the film has a lot of similarities to E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the film makes up for it with its character dynamics, beautiful scenery, a powerful message about how families should always stick together, and the film knows how to lighten up the mood whenever it does get mean. The film does know how to do this in moderation, making it to where the movie doesn't feel too harsh, as the film has tons of moments where it gets funny, as opposed to other derivative films of its kind like Monster Family or Lewis and the Aliens. However, because I don't have too much to really say about the original film, I'm not going to do a review on the original original film, given that I only really talk about the films that I talked about or watched whenever there was something in them that really interested me. That's basically what I plan on doing when I get around to The Lion King 2019, where I'd rewatch the original before going into the remake to specifically talk about what works in the original versus what the remake does. So consider this review as the closest that you'd get to me doing a Sean's Yearly Reviews video on the original movie. The film gets an 8 out of 10. Not sure if it would top the SpongeBob SquarePants movie on my rankings so far, but I'd certainly say that's up there. So with that being said, because I said that the original movie gave me a reference for everything I'd go into regarding the remake, what are my thoughts on it? It's bad. And I mean really, really bad. Would I go as far as to say that it's one of the worst movies that I reviewed so far? No. I don't know if it would even make it into the top 10. Considering some of the other movies that I've talked about so far, even Lewis and the Aliens, a pale imitation of Lilo and Stitch, is a far worse movie than this film, but there are just way too many problems with this movie for me to simply ignore. And to address what comments that I might end up getting before I get them, the problem with a lot of these remakes that have been being put out by Disney, not even just from the live action side, but also with the animated Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies, is not so much the fact that they're different or exactly the same as the original but don't do anything different. The problem is that they really cannot decide whether or not they want to be like the original or if they want to stand on their own. So they try to have their cake and eat it too by throwing in a bunch of unnecessary changes that just makes the movie a lot worse. This is exactly why a show like Schnookums and Meat was so bad. It wanted to be like Ren and Stimpy so badly, but at the exact same time, it really didn't want to be like Ren and Stimpy, which in turn created this massive problem that caused the show's quality to suffer hard. The exact problem that a lot of these remakes,
Lilo and Stitch 2025 included,
have. Even if I've never watched the original Lilo and Stitch movie in my life, the movie would still not be good because if you look at this film from two directions, a lot of the aspects that this movie decides to do just don't work at all. The alien designs just don't translate well to live action, to the point where they ended up not using Pleakley and Jamba's designs for most of the movie, which could also explain why they apparently decided to remove Gontu from the movie, because the film was not given a big enough budget for them to basically have him be in the remake, since the film was initially supposed to be a straight-to-Disney Plus movie, but they made it a theatrical at the last second. But like The Lion King, the original movie being animated worked in its advantage because you can do so much in animation than you can do in live action. And the sister bond that this movie is trying to go for just does not feel genuine at all, because the remake made both Lilo and Nani completely flat, to the point where it just feels incredibly hollow, but when looking at it compared to the original, it becomes even worse. As the first and one of the movie's biggest problems is how they heavily butchered both Lilo and Nani. One of the original movie's major highlights, like I said, is the sister bond between Lilo and Nani, where in spite of the fact that yes, Lilo and Nani do get into fights, you do see the chemistry between both of them and how they're trying to survive after their parents end up passing away. And even beyond that, both of them have energy and charisma to the point where you can tell what personalities that they have. Lilo is the naive little girl that, even though yes, she can act out, a lot of the time, she stood as a very interesting character that a lot of people on the spectrum can relate to on a personal level, and Nani, while not as interesting, is a very supportive sister that, while yes, she does get into fights with Lilo a lot of the time, you can tell that she does all of this because she cares about Lilo, and is trying her best to make sure that she doesn't get taken away by CPS.
and not gonna lie, Nani's design is absolutely wonderful.
All of which is something that the remake has completely disregarded. Because the major thing that is completely missing from this remake is the passion, flavor, and love that went into Lilo and Nani as characters. Because both of the actors that are playing Lilo and Nani in the remake are just not putting their all into it for completely different reasons. Because with Nani, you don't get the feeling that she really cares about her sister very much. And if she does, the way that she's expressing it through her body language indicates something completely different. For most of the movie, she looks incredibly disinterested, as if she doesn't even want to be in the movie. Now yes, I understand that she was a bit pessimistic in the original. She was able able to still show emotions throughout most of this movie. Even when she's not getting actively angry, she just looks so annoyed most of the time, as if she's just about ready to wrap up the production of the movie because she was just there for a paycheck. Remember in the original film, when Nani ended up quitting her job after her boss sees Stitch attacking Pleakley? She doesn't hold it against Lilo or Stitch, since she's obviously under the presumption that Stitch isn't disciplined yet. Well, in the remake, she ends up as sounding exactly like she's blaming Lilo and Stitch for that happening, but they ended up changing it to where Stitch ends up causing a fire. And remember when she ended up bursting into tears after she found out that her sister was taken by Gontu in the original? Well, in the remake, she flat out looks like she isn't even fazed by it. Like, ma'am, your sister was kidnapped by an alien. Show some freaking emotion. And with Lilo, they kind of did the inverse of this, where even though, yes, she does show more emotions than Nani, what they did to Lilo was that they completely sanitized her to the point where any traits of imperfections that she had before are completely gone now. All the remake does is that they oversell in the cuteness to the point where you could make this movie not have Stitch and have him just be a random alien and replace Lilo with, say, a random blonde girl, and you would not be able to tell that this movie was supposed to be a remake of Lilo and Stitch. Lilo was an actual character in the original movie. Her snapping at her friends at the beginning was there to show how, because she's possibly on the spectrum, she has a poor sense of impulse control than most other kids. And throughout the entirety of the movie, she's completely aware of her situation and how, because she's still grieving over the loss of her parents, it's more difficult for her to control her emotions. And like Nani, she knew how to emote with more than just happiness or the speechless look on her face. When she finds out that Stitch was an alien in the original, she gets angry before they get captured by Gontu. Here though, she just looks dumbfounded when Jamba tells her that Stitch was using her. At every other time, she's basically just cute and bubbly for the purpose of being cute and bubbly, basically the opposite of what DuckTales did with Webby. 2017 Webby is like the original Lilo, while the 2025 Lilo is basically 1987 Webby. And because they basically removed all of these edges from Lilo's character, certain motivations are completely watered down to the point where they feel incredibly safe at best and feel extremely hostile towards what the original source material did at worst. As well as taking out a lot of her quirks that made her interesting and just making her a character that is just there to emphasize the fact that she's cute and that's it. Even though being cute is not a personality. It's the exact same problem that I had with Billy from the Polar Express. Just being quiet and timid is not a personality trait. That's just something that someone is. A character trait is what they're defined as, which is why Fluttershy from MLPFIM is such an amazing character. They didn't even have Lilo be late to the hula dancer show like the original, and now they basically made it to where she's not acting out impulsively to others anymore. They made it to where Lilo is entirely justified for acting out. The first major change that they made from the original that immediately made me know what I was gonna be in for this remake is that they changed the reason as to why Lilo attacked her friend. In the original, Lilo already ran late because she basically fed a fish that she thinks controls the weather a peanut butter sandwich and messed things up because she made the stage all wet. And they also removed this reason as to why Lilo attacked her friend. Yes, the line,
"I think she's crazy,"
is still in the movie, but it's not even said directly to Lilo. The movie changed it to where the reason as to why Lilo attacked her friend was because she straight up pushed her, whilst also being heartbroken that Nani wasn't there, even though Nani wasn't even attending the hula dancing show in the original movie. And given that Lilo was possibly on the spectrum in the original movie, minor insults like being called crazy was gonna make her act out. But given that Lilo's friend pushed her, which could have gotten her seriously hurt, it's not something to simply ignore, so Lilo was justified in this movie to do this. And for Stitch, they basically decided to strip him of his development, making it to where he doesn't read the Ugly Duckling story, leading there to not be any sort of transition between him starting to become behaved after acting bad from the majority of the film. And as for the changes made to this movie compared to the original, they really do emphasize a problem that a lot of these remakes have. Like I said before, these remakes don't know whether or not they want to be the original, or if they want to do something slightly different to distinct itself from the original, almost as if these movies should just be retellings of the original films, not directly copying the animated films. That's why Charlie and the Chocolate Factory works so well. The film was trying to be a direct adaptation of the book, not like the 70s Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory film. Meanwhile, the Tom and Jerry and Willy Wonka crossover directly did everything scene by scene from the 70s film, whilst changing the most important plot points to now make it to where Charlie isn't directly responsible for his goals being complete. And that's exactly how these remakes are like. They do the exact same things from the animated counterparts, but they end up creating problems as a result by changing certain plot points, whether if it would be making the female protagonist into a girl boss, changing an alcoholic beverage into root beer, or making important plot points not work anymore. And for Lilo and Stitch, there's an entire list that I could go through, but for now, let's just stick with the major elephants in the room. They completely erased Gontu from the film because Disney apparently didn't want to spend all that much money to include him, even though he's one of the most important characters in the original movie, and emphasizing this right now, you are Disney! You have billions upon billions of dollars in order to include him, and if you don't want to spend money on alien designs, don't remake Lilo and Stitch then! And they also made Jamba into the main villain and got rid of the Russian accent. Yes, Jamba was antagonistic in the original, but he eventually came around in the end of the original film. And essentially, what this movie did to Jamba is exactly what the Darkstalkers cartoon did to Morgan. And they also pushed Bubbles to the side, making him into a generic CIA agent who looks for Stitch with nothing else to do, and basically replaces his original role in the original movie with this generic social security woman. And lastly, and the worst change of them all, is how badly they messed up the message of what the original movie was trying to go for. Which leads me into the biggest problem with this movie. The film feels like it was made by someone who not only didn't like the original, but also had a massive distaste for it, and wanted to try as hard as possible to destroy everything that it did. Not saying that it absolutely was, but the way that the film is written, and how straight up apathetic and bitter the movie is, I'm saying that it feels as if this is the case. And what they decided to do is disregard the original movie's message about how Ohana means family, and that family should always stick together. Which also leads back into me talking about how horribly that this movie messed up the sibling bond between Lilo and Nani, where now, nothing that they do to emphasize their care around each other feels genuine at all. There are only 2 actual moments where they show that they care about each other,
2 of which were directly lifted from the original movie.
but the rest of the time, they don't really show any of the chemistry all that much. In this movie, it's not Nani who took Lilo to get a dog, it was her neighbor instead. And instead of Lilo using Ohana means family, and that family should never be forgotten when Nani was about to kick Stitch out of the house, Lilo now uses this as a guilt-tripping method, while Stitch is still causing mayhem, topped off with the fact that Nani says Ohana doesn't mean anything, and that Lilo should just start living in reality. But all of this pales in comparison to what they do in the ending. Good God, the ending of this movie is atrocious. Like, it's literally up there with the ending of Ivan the Incredible, and having an ending that just solidifies every single problem that the movie has. Definitely the second worst ending in a movie I reviewed so far. Basically, after Stitch gets to stay in exile with his newfound family,
Just like what happens in the original film,
the remake decides to change this, where Lilo gets taken away, and Nani goes off to follow her dreams in marine biology. So basically, the movie that is a remake to an animated film that had a message that families should always stick together decided to pull a Ralph Breaks the Internet and Toy Story 4, and basically having said characters split apart from each other, and the movie does not see this as a problem. Plus, even ignoring the original film's context, and that the film basically ended with Lilo being in custody with Nani, ending with the other aliens being a part of her family too, this ending is still very bad. Because the entire point of the movie was supposed to be that Nani was trying to make sure that Lilo doesn't get taken away from her, so to have that happen anyway was a complete waste of time. And you could literally skip out on this movie and you would miss nothing. And also, Lilo is completely unfazed by this, further showing how badly they destroyed the message that the original movie was trying to go for.
Ohana means family. Families should always stick together and never be forgotten.
Well, according to this movie, Ohana doesn't mean anything unless it's used as a tool to try and manipulate someone, but this message doesn't apply to things like caring about your family in a genuine manner and straight up abandoning them. So overall, would I go as far as to say that Lilo and Stitch is the worst movie I reviewed so far? No. Heck, I don't know if I'd put it as the worst Disney remake, considering the fact that I haven't watched a lot of them. Even in regards to animated movies, including other Disney films, I've seen movies with much more harmful content in them, such as Ivan the Incredible and Raya and the Last Dragon, and others do have worse family bonding messages in them like Monster Family. And between the two very bad alien movies that basically try to replicate Lilo and Stitch and end up being inferior movies, I'd still take this movie over Lewis and the Aliens, because where this movie is just a soulless remake that destroys the message of the original, Lewis and the Aliens is a pale imitation of Lilo and Stitch that is straight up unpleasant to watch and is very close to barely even passing as an actual movie with a narrative. But I can see people hating this movie more than that film, because Lilo and Stitch 2025 blatantly disrespects characters that people do legitimately care about. Meanwhile, Lewis and the Aliens was there to exist and exist on its own. But still though, my recommendation for this movie is incredibly obvious. Just avoid this movie and go watch the original instead. You'll have a much better time with it, and if you really want any other Lilo and Stitch products to fall back on, just watch the animated series and watch the straight-to-DVD sequels. Because all this movie is gonna do is taint any memories that you might have had with the original film, and if you are gonna watch it, I implore you to watch the original film first, because all this movie will do is ruin any memories you might have had with the original, or even worse, makes the franchise look bad for you if you hadn't seen the original. And unlike with Lightyear, where it's pretty difficult to watch Buzz Lightyear of Star Command, due to the fact that John Lasseter hated the show, and the show ended up getting buried as a result, you can still watch the original film as well as the other products relating to it, as they're available on Disney+. Meanwhile, this movie is definitely not gonna be part of the Ohana anytime soon. Elemental is a 2023 Pixar movie that me and my mom saw in theaters in September of that year, which, getting this right out of the way, is just alright. In regards to animated films I reviewed so far for Sean's yearly reviews, it's definitely leagues above something like Little Nemo Adventures in Slumberland, and especially Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken, but nowhere close to being all that special. I'll give it this: I'd still take this movie over the Polar Express because the characters at least have names and an actual personality, but I'd honestly take something like Turning Red or The Road to El Dorado more than this film, because they're a lot more interesting than this movie. So, what is Elemental about? This movie revolves around a fire element named Ember. She's about to be put in charge of her father's shop, on one condition, where as long as she doesn't blow up, she'd be put in charge. Ember fails, and she ends up having water get into the basement by accident as a result, leading to the most predictable story that you could think of, where Ember needs to keep her lie going, as she's assisted by a water element named Wade, whom over time she falls in love with. And together, they need to find out what is causing this water leak to happen. To get the major issues with this movie off of my chest, so that way I can blow off some major steam regarding what I think of this movie, the film is very generic, and on top of that, the film plays things extremely safe, to the point where it kind of felt like I was watching an Illumination movie. Weird how the Super Mario Bros. Movie, which came out the exact same year, feels more in line with the Pixar movie than the actual Pixar movie, because where the Super Mario Bros. Took a chance and succeeded in the end,
despite being rushed,
Elemental feels bland. And that's honestly a shame too, because the movie's premise does sound promising, and the world-building aspect of this movie was very well done. But the film barely takes any sort of chance with anything else, because this movie is entirely run on tropes and cliches that have been beaten to the ground, to the point where I honestly do believe that this is one of Pixar's most predictable movies.
Coincidentally enough, DreamWorks' most predictable movie came out less than a month after this movie.
Because everything that this movie did, you've seen elsewhere. That it's not a surprise that Ember's lie that she's been keeping is gonna come back to her later in the film to cause her not to be put in charge of her father's shop. A Bug's Life literally did this exact same thing over 26 years earlier, and it was criticized for this exact same thing as well, even back then too. And I think I know the reason as to why this movie is doing this. The film is style over substance, because I'll be completely honest, the animation is absolutely gorgeous in this movie. Some of the best animation from the studio yet, with the film's interpretations of elements like fire and water, with textures that are a lot more different than the last. Granted, there were films that had better animation in the exact same year that this movie was released, like Across the Spider-Verse or TMNT Mutant Mayhem, but the animation is amazing regardless. But that's the thing though, the film puts its animation first and puts its writing second. Which, getting onto that aspect real quick, the film is essentially just another Romeo and Juliet story, where two characters from two different sets of families fall in love to the disapproval of both of them. Though in this movie's case, Wade's family does approve of Ember, and also, the characters are not even anything new. From the very first announcements of this movie's release, the film often got compared to that old Fireboy and Water Girl Flash game. I'd even say that this movie is essentially the film adaptation of the game. Although, maybe they decided to change the genders around so that they didn't face any legal consequences from this. And strangely enough, the way that the characters are written in this movie does indicate that the main characters' genders were originally going to be the other way around. As in the movie, Ember is the more aggressive and stern of the two, while Wade is more emotional. Maybe they decided to change the genders around so that they didn't come off as sexist, since those kinds of traits are associated with the opposite gender after all, or maybe they did it because they wanted to make a hilarious pun about how Wade said that Ember is hot. Even though women can find men hot as well, it's not a gender-specific thing at all, movie. And this is also an indicator as well, because Wade comes off as kind of a damsel in distress in a lot of these sequences, where Ember needs to save him. Although, maybe they also did this because, you know, females need to be more progressive nowadays and act as if they need no man. Even though some of the most popular and underrated shows like Gravity Falls and OKKO were gender neutral, and their gender didn't matter. And also, and I'm going to be completely honest right now, I really don't like Wade in this movie. The problem with him is not so much the fact that he's hateable. He's definitely tolerable in comparison to Gary from Sahara or Ping from Duck Duck Goose. The problem with him instead is that he's completely useless to the plot. And the only kind of purpose that he serves to the movie is getting Ember showered with bad luck throughout the film's runtime. Granted, he didn't realize that Ember's shot meant so much to her father, which was definitely on Amber for not telling him sooner. And him coming into the feature was all on Amber, though when dealing with the kind of pressure that she goes through in the movie, it's understandable why she has constant anger issues. But plot-wise, Wade has no other purpose to the feature besides crying constantly and saying absolutely stupid things to easily make either Ember or her family lash out at him, saying that the food is good when it's watered down. Those are the most wrong choice of words that you could say, period. And a lot of the other times, he's used as a literal plot device, such as in the sequence where Wade basically tries to butter Ember up by taking her to the garden center that got flooded, or basically trying to stick his nose into Ember's personal business. Yes, during the fake-out death sequence in this movie,
Add this movie to the list of tropes that has been overused with this trope.
Ember's father lets her know that she doesn't have to run the business to make him happy, but before this scene, she was under this impression, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Because as shown in the movie, Ember's family trusts her to carry their legacy, and Ember's under a lot of pressure in the movie. And so, to have Wade crash the party on her big day to cause the unnecessary Act 2 breakup serves no purpose. It's just here to basically dunk on Ember for her life's decisions, despite it not being Wade's business on what career she pursues. The message itself is great, admittedly, but I do believe that this message could have and should have been done better. Because there's a way that you could deliver this message without trying to push the career onto another person if they're unsure of what they want to do, And that's exactly what Wade does in the movie, crashing the party to try and pressure and force an answer out of Ember, which honestly feels kind of wrong in a way. I would have preferred it if they had the glass break, and as soon as Ember is put in charge of the shop and the film plays out with the shop flooding, then it could do this. And I think the message might have come out a lot more strong as a result. So, in regards to Pixar movies, I would definitely put this one as one of their weaker movies. It's an above average 6 out of 10, though that's only because of the animation and the message alone. I'm sorry I didn't have all that much to really say about this movie, but the film doesn't really give me all that much to talk about, despite the fact that I wanted to talk about it for a while. Though, if I'm being completely honest, out of the 3 trailers that were revealed to us in the spring of 2023, this film is honestly the best of the 3, considering what I think about Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken, and Wish has already become one of the most infamous Disney movies of all time. But regardless, Elemental is just fine. So, in regards to the big 3 television networks, Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and Disney, they've definitely had their moments of making shows that are good and making shows that are bad. Even during the times before people screamed out the words, "This network started going downhill after this specific date," studios are bound to make mistakes. We all know that. If this introduction is not enough to ride home the point. So, not only are studios bound to make mistakes once in a while, even during their golden years, but one studio is not exclusive to having specific issues. Nickelodeon is a studio that has a history of mistreating shows that aren't on par with SpongeBob, but so is Disney. If what they did to Nightmare Ned, Teacher's Pet, Dave the Barbarian, The Buzz on Maggie, and Haley's On It are anything to go by. And more specifically, what I'm talking about today is Cartoon Network, and the topic of today's subject, Villainous. Now, in regards to Cartoon Network's history of mistreating shows, I'd say that this began during the time when Johnny Bravo got canceled briefly after season 1, and they didn't bring Van Partible back for season 2, and really began around Mike Lou and Og and Sheep in the Big City. And a lot of mistreatment happened from there, from canceling shows over toys like Courage the Cowardly Dog or Camp Lazlo, to giving shows tax write-offs like Megas XLR or Symbionic Titan, to generally mishandling time slots, which mess with the show's ratings, like Hi Hi Puffy Amiyumi and OKKO. But in regards to Villainous, it's one of those shows that was generally mistreated, but not for the reasons that you might think. You see, the first time that I've heard about anything about Villainous was back in 2016 or 17, when it was a pilot at first. And in all honesty, the show sounded interesting, I guess, but Cartoon Network's general treatment of the show seems to have generally restricted the potential that it could have had. In all honesty, I haven't seen a series that for years went through a ton of delays and struggles before being turned into a full-fledged show that ended up being short-lived anyway since Making Fiends. But even then, Making Fiends was able to make it to the 6-episode mark, which was the same amount of episodes that the first seasons of Ren and Stimpy and Chalk Zone had. Villainous, to this very day, not counting the shorts, only has 6 episodes.
3 if you count the full half hours. And if you ask, no, I don't know why Cartoon Network does this now.
And as of right now, this is the second shortest of the Cartoon Network shows, ahead of Long Live the Royals' 2 half hours worth of episodes. For years, Cartoon Network had been teasing the audience about this show's official release, with things like the Easter egg in the crossover Nexus episode of OKKO, and a crossover episode in Victor and Valentino. And then when the show was finally released in English in 2023, we finally got to see what the show got. And as a result, this is where I'm here right now, ignoring all the mistreatment that this show is given. The show is alright. The best way to sum up this show in a way where I can summarize it, so that I won't give myself a headache while writing this script, this show basically walks so that Vivzy Pop's HB can run. Like that show, the basic premise of this show is that this guy in a top hat and tuxedo, named Black Hat, sends 2 characters, a guy with the lunch bag on his head named Dr. Flug, and a woman with long hair named Dementia, out on missions to the request of any client that Black Hat meets up with. with. Except, whereas in HB, the show takes place in Heck, and the characters that are tasked with the jobs of taking care of anyone that Blitz wants Moxie, Billy, and Luna to take care of in the human world are either imps or hounds, this show is basically more in line with the show like Evil Con Carne, where the characters are just regular villains, some being more evil than the others. Although Evil Con Carne tries to be lighthearted, given that it is a show that is generally aimed towards a much younger demographic,
If you take out the sequences where they do more adult jokes.
but that's really besides the point. Heck, this show even makes a joke about this at the end of one of the episodes. Villainous tries to be more serious. I mean, at the end of the first episode, it's implied that Black Hat gives them an extremely harsh punishment if they do so much as a mediocre job on missions. And Black Hat was also pressuring Dr. Flug to wrestle against dementia while she was possessed in episode 3. Needless to say, Hector Con Carne is definitely not going to rule the world with this guy being around anytime soon. But getting into the issues that I have with Villainous, it's not so much what the show itself does with itself that has the issues that it's got now, but rather the treatment of the show that was given noticeably affect the show in so many ways. Many of the other shows that I've reviewed so far in this series,
Even those that were admittedly mistreated.
were issues that were caused in the shows themselves, but for Villainous, the show gives off the impression that it wanted to do more with itself, and it was hoping that it would end up getting more seasons to flesh itself out, but they were stuck with 6 episodes instead. But just like what I pointed out with Middle School Moguls and Long Live the Royals, the show does not give off that impression that it was supposed to be a miniseries in the slightest, and that it wanted to be a full-fledged show itself, but executive meddling ended up tampering with the show as a result. The show also feels extremely disappointing in regards to the crossover aspect. Now, I am someone who does have a thing for crossovers. It's very cool to see what it would be like to see characters from different shows or properties interacting with each other. And you know, I was originally thinking that maybe this is what Villainous would be like, because a few years ago, this show got a crossover with Victor and Valentino,
Which was a lot of fun.
that basically had Dr. Flug and Dementia traveling to that show's world. And to me, this does seem like a fun concept for a show like this. Because in essence, Cartoon Network shows have always had this crossover aspect to it, even at the end of the Cartoon era with Cartoon Network Invaded. So this does seem like an interesting idea for a series, having the characters go into other Cartoon Network shows, definitely not the shows that are slice of life of course, but the ones that are more fantastical would have been nice to see. But what we got instead is a case where it wants to have its cake and eat it too, where the show doesn't really commit to the crossover aspect that the Victor and Valentino episode set up. But rather, the show just kind of threw the crossover aspect in haphazardly, where the Cartoon Network characters would often show up at random points in the episodes, when it's very much implied that all of them are meant to live in their own universes, and they're often just there for background Easter eggs at most. Not even as some sort of joke, or the show acknowledging that a character from another completely different show is there. Going back to OKKO, what makes that show work in regards to its references is that the show used those characters to either make jokes based on them, or they just flat out do a crossover with them. Same thing applies to Johnny Bravo, as well as Billy and Mandy. But putting all that aside, as I stated before, I find this show to be just decent. It's probably like a 6 out of 10, primarily because of the fact that buried underneath the wasted potential that this show had, there are a ton of things that I do like about this show, like the characters, for example. Dementia is a very fun character, and the voice actress was obviously having a ton of fun with the role, and Black Hat is giving me some vibes of Alistair from Has-Been Hotel, but he's a lot more menacing in how he approaches things. But there are a lot of things that this show does that, due to executive meddling, really affected the show in the long run. But at the exact same time, I can't help but feel absolutely sorry for this show and what it had to go through and what it got in the end. Maybe the shorts are better than the show itself, but I don't know if they are, because unlike Making Fiends, I didn't watch any of the shorts before jumping into this show, but given that the shorts are pretty hard to find, and most if not all of them are not even in English, it's safe to say that the shorts don't really affect the show all that much. But when looking at some of them and what they did with the Cartoon Network characters, it's safe to say that maybe there was a reason why Cartoon Network didn't air these shorts or the show in the first place. So, on one night, I was feeling extremely bored. I was letting my phone charge, and I was looking for something to watch, since I got Tubi and there were many choices to choose from. And the choice that I decided to go for was the French animated series that goes by the name of Zig and Sharko. And considering the fact that this show takes place on the beach, I think that it fits with the summer feeling, since I started watching the show in June of 2023. But I'm going to do something a little different today, in that I'm going to be dedicating this review to two shows. On one part of this review, I'll be dedicating to Zig and Sharko, while the other, I'm dedicating to the spin-off, The Adventures of Bernie. Since the Zig and Sharko half isn't going to take too long, and I have quite a few things to say about The Adventures of Bernie, I'm making this a double review for you guys. I know that I technically did this back during my Eek the Cat review, where that was also a triple review, since Eek shared its time slot with two other shows. Zig and Sharko and The Adventures of Bernie, from my knowledge, didn't share the same time slot, but they are part of the same franchise, and this is being done so that way I don't have to do a separate Sean's Thoughts or Network Reviews episode on that show in particular.
Under the sea, under the sea.
Let's start off with Zig and Sharko first, since that show came out first, obviously. And to start off this review, here's a good question for you guys. Besides the writing and the comedy, what makes a series? If you said the characters, then you are absolutely correct. To quote Alex Hirsch, it's all about the characters. Regardless of how your series looks, regardless of its high concept, regardless of its celebrity voices or budget or whatever, all of that is secondary to your characters. Are they funny? Do they have personalities that pop and are memorable and are interesting next to each other? And well, this particular statement from Alex Hirsch is completely true in this case. What makes me say that Zig and Sharko is a good show is its characters. The characters themselves actually save the show in the long run, because to get all of the issues with this show out of the way, one of the biggest issues that I have with Zig and Sharko is its humor. The humor in Zig and Sharko isn't very funny, to be honest. It's just kind of there. And they aren't very effective, since the show repeats the exact same jokes over and over again, with little variation to it. Comparing this show to Tom and Jerry real quick, what makes those shorts funny to this day is the variation to it. The jokes that Tom and Jerry tells isn't just, lol, it's a cat getting hurt by a mouse. They actually go through a ton of creative ways of how they do their other slapstick, while with Zig and Sharko, it mostly involves Sharko hitting Zig whenever he so much as lays his hands on Marina, and that's basically it. And not only that, but this show can get pretty repetitive at times, similarly to Code Lyoko,
which coincidentally is also a French show.
This show's repetitive nature was shown the most in Season 1.
Just like Code Lyoko.
I mean, the animation in Season 1 is still good,
having this Ren and Stimpy feeling to it.
Even if I do prefer the look of Seasons 2 and 3, since it's much more colorful and makes the characters look more cute, to the point where I was thinking to myself that maybe they should vary it up a little bit. They do have some episodes that are set in other locations. There's even one episode that is set in a city far away from the island, but at every other point, Season 1 is mostly set near a rock that Marina sits on, with Zig on the edge of the island with Bernie, as he thinks of ways to try and get to her without Sharko beating him up. And these particular episodes are indistinguishable enough to the point where episodes are kind of hard to recognize, since what we see is set up in the exact same way every single time. Heck, there aren't even any location changes, unlike Tom and Jerry or Code Lyoko, as well as Nightmare Ned or Kappa Mikey. Getting up to the point where there are even some episodes that reuses the exact same animation of a guy who crashes his boat into the sand of the island due to blurry vision and gets angry to the point where he jumps off the boat into a raft and goes away. Seasons 2 and 3 do make improvements to this, as for one thing, It's no longer just Zig going forward into the water to try and catch Marina while Sharko guards her. The characters are actually outside of the water now and are exploring more than just the water. Though yes, I would honestly like if they decided to go ahead and mix it up a little bit at some point. Have some episodes that are set on the beach, one underwater, and another where the characters travel to somewhere different. Because another issue that I have with this show is that it feels very limited, which is a similar feeling that I have with Chibiverse, which is also very limited in regards to what it's trying to go for as a successor to House of Mouse, as each season of this show so far has a theme to it. Season 1 is mostly set underwater, Season 2 is set on the beach, and Season 3 is set on a cruise ship. Although, when you have every episode of a season sticking to the exact same location over and over again, it does make it become very tiring. Seasons 2 and 3 aren't as bad with this as Season 1, as they at least spend certain episodes on other parts of the island, or somewhere that the cruise ship goes, but I do believe that some variety would make things better. Some characters in this show, for example, have not even appeared since Season 1, but given that this show is on hiatus at the moment, there is plenty of room for improvement and ways that they could implement Season 1 characters into future episodes. SpongeBob SquarePants, for instance, is a show that for the longest time basically ignored a majority of its background characters, most notably with Bubble Bass, but recently, they brought him back and basically made him that show's nerd character that is kind of the rival to Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob and Patrick to an extent, and that show has been continuing to do this ever since seasons 9, 10, and 11, and well, when it comes to Zig and Sharko, we hardly if ever see what's underwater in seasons 2 and 3, and when we do, those sequences are very short. However, in spite of the fact that this show does have its issues, the thing that does save this show from being average, in the same vein as either the clutter segments from Meek the Cat or Power Players, is actually the characters, which comes full circle with what I mentioned a little bit ago. That being the fact that the characters can make a show good in spite of the other aspects being lackluster. Similarly to Puka, even though the characters don't talk at all in this series, you get what their characters are like from how they are animated on screen. And the series is also better off without any dialogue at all. Sharko is the strong and aggressive, but lovable shark who protects Marina by any means necessary. Zig is the hungry hyena who wants to eat Marina, and goes through many schemes to try and capture her and eat her. Marina is the mermaid who is sweet and naive. Bernie is the genius who sets up the plans for Zig to try and eat her. I could go on. Something that I find very clever about this series too, is that nobody talks, not even the characters who you'd think would talk. Rarely if ever do the characters even say anything throughout the series. Where Tom and Jerry and Puka did have two characters, namely Tom, Jerry, Puka, and Guru, who don't talk at all in those shows/shorts. Nobody talks in Zig and Sharko. Not even the few human characters that we do see, including Marina,
even though she's a mermaid.
But this honestly does make this show easier to watch in the long run, in case the show's future episodes end up being hard to find in English, so whether the show is in French or whatever, this show won't be hard to watch at all. One standout character that I do want to talk about in this series is Sharko's girlfriend, Marina. She's definitely my favorite character in this show, and definitely one of my new favorite characters of all time. Not only is she absolutely adorable, with sounds and giggles that are just as cute, but she's also a character that ended up surprising me while watching each episode of the show. Because at first, Marina is one of those characters that you could describe as the damsel in distress, similar to other damsel in distress characters like April O'Neil from the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or Princess Peach from Mario.
Barring the one from the 2023 movie, she's awesome, and Bowser's song about her is awesome as well.
Where Marina always gets captured by Zig and is about to be swallowed by him, while being naive towards what's happening to her. But at the exact same time, she's a character who defies a damsel in distress. Normally with damsel in distress characters, they're often one of two things. They're either characters that end up getting captured by the villain and the hero goes and saves them, or characters that try to subvert this trope but ends up having them get captured anyway. Marina is a way to do this trope well, because when she isn't in need of help from Sharko,
given that she hardly pays attention to her surroundings surroundings.
There are many points in this series where she can stand up for herself when someone else gets in her way, or when Sharko gets blamed for something that Zig made happen, and she also doesn't let anyone else walk all over her, as there are points where she does get irritated when either Sharko does something to her, or when someone else annoys her. And when it comes to the relationship between her and Sharko, that too is very wholesome and sweet, and gives this show enough charm to be able to watch multiple episodes of without feeling bored. Though, I absolutely recommend skipping over the episode Manic Mermaid, for the obvious reason being that it makes Sharko become way out of character, and I do feel a little indifferent about Zig and Bernie's portions in the series, as Zig's whole shtick of trying to eat Marina gets predictable fast, but Sharko and Marina are the two characters that kept me watching the show, and while not as adorable as Marina's sounds or giggles, this show has many moments where it actually makes me feel sorry for Sharko, as puppy dog sounds play over him whenever he's feeling sad when accidentally hurting Marina, and that's quite an accomplishment that the show is able to do, because sharks are normally absolutely terrifying, given that I actually had a dream once where it was this found footage video similar to that Paris Catacombs one, which was about a guy who got lost in a water park because of two anthropomorphic sharks who were ready to eat them at the end of that video. Now, you guys might be wondering, why did I decide to go ahead and do a Sean's Thoughts video on this show, rather than a Sean's Network Reviews episode? Well, that's pretty simple actually. In spite of the fact that this show came out in 2010, this show is actually still going on to this very day. But unlike, say, The Simpsons, South Park, SpongeBob, and Family Guy, this show only has 3 seasons so far, with only 78 episodes. That's because this show takes multiple hiatuses in between. The first hiatus that this show took, by the way, was between June 14th, 2011 and February 15th, 2016. Just wow. And people thought that Johnny Bravo and Steven Universe took long hiatuses. And between seasons 2 and 3, that hiatus took 3 years. And the show is on hiatus at the moment. The 4th season, on the other hand, came out in 2024, but I've yet to have watched any episode yet. But apparently, the 4th season is about Marina getting legs.
Though this was already done in a season 1 episode, and she felt absolutely miserable in that episode with getting legs.
And I haven't been keeping up with any of the words about the show in 2024, but I've been hearing that season 4 isn't good, but I'll make that judgment on if it's good or not when I get around to it for myself. Because like I said, I make the judgments on what I think of shows and movies on my own, not through what someone else thinks about it. Zig and Sharko is definitely not at the top of the Sean's Network Reviews ranking. It's not as good as either Puka or OKK Let's Be Heroes, because they have great characters and great comedy. Heck, I'd even say that Kappa Mikey is better, given that it's funnier. But it's a show that I enjoyed watching so far. But like Kamp Koral, these are my thoughts at the moment. The show may get better or worse, but I do wish this show the best of luck for what it has in store in the future.
Is this some kind of cruel joke?
Now, The Adventures of Bernie, on the other hand, is a showcase that, even though I didn't have much to say about Zig and Sharko, it could have been so much worse. Case in point, The Adventures of Bernie. Now, since this was a part of the exact same franchise, and Kawaii Life Antonio reminded me that Bernie from Zig and Sharko got his own spin-off,
Which I knew from the start.
I decided to give this particular show a chance, to see how it both stacks up to the predecessor and how it stands on its own. And I gotta say, The Adventures of Bernie is pretty dang bad. Like, not the absolute worst show I reviewed so far. This show is still better than the Tom and Jerry comedy show, Robot Boy, and Thundercats Roar, because those shows are worse written, more annoying, and far more anger-inducing in the case of Robot Boy and Thundercats Roar. But oh man, The Adventures of Bernie is pretty close to being there. What's the issue that I have with The Adventures of Bernie? Well, do you remember Planet Sheen, which basically took the comic relief Sheen and decided to launch him into space and put him as the status of being the main character, but while he's in space, he doesn't care a single bit about getting home, but Nesbeth does? Well, that's exactly what this show reminds me of, except two of the differences that this show makes from Planet Sheen is that instead of taking a comic relief and leaving him stranded out in space, this show decides to take the partner of Sharko's enemy, Zig, named Bernie, and leave him stranded out in the ocean, far away from the island. And this time, Bernie is actually concerned about getting home, but the universe always tells him no.
Don't worry, I'll be getting to this problem in just a little bit.
Although, just like Planet Sheen, this show does have a major problem as a spin-off of the predecessor series, where there are aspects of the original series that you'd be wondering about while watching it. In Planet Sheen, it doesn't answer why Sheen's friends and family from Jimmy Neutron didn't end up getting worried sick about where Sheen went, and it also doesn't answer why Jimmy didn't go out looking for Sheen, despite the fact that he could easily locate him in space. This series, on the other hand, doesn't answer the question as to why Zig doesn't attempt to go out looking for Bernie, given that the original series had an episode where Zig actively freaks out when Bernie went missing. But this series completely sweeps this under the rug, and the characters from the previous series are indeed aware that Bernie got stranded out in the middle of the ocean, and yet the questions still remain unanswered. So this show already fails as a spin-off to the original series. But that is honestly the least of this show's problems. The real issue with this show is the characters. What made the original Zig and Sharko series so good was that there was a specific comfort value behind it, where in spite of the fact that the show's concept was pretty horrifying, the characters were able to make the series have a lighthearted feeling to leave you with a good feeling afterward. The Adventures of Bernie, on the other hand, does the exact opposite, where the idea of this spin-off is legitimately upsetting, on top of the fact that this is the type of series that I would strongly not advise you watch if you're in a bad mood, because this series is legitimately frustrating, with almost every single new character that they introduced being annoying or awful for one reason or the other. As I stated in my reviews on Monster Family and Ollie's Pack, I don't mind it when shows get a little mean here and there. It's when they end up having nothing else to support it is when I ended up having an issue with it. And The Adventures of Bernie is a good example of this. Unlike Planet Sheen, where people have said that Sheen works but only in small doses, I don't know what people's general opinions are on Bernie, but I can say that while I don't think that he was anything special in the original series, he worked as a good second-in-command to Zig. If you guys were a fan of Bernie, then I'm sure that you guys will not like this show either, because this series' main purpose is to beat down on Bernie and emotionally manipulate him as much as possible. And by the way, when I say that this series tortures Bernie as much as possible, I actually do mean it. And this isn't even a one-time thing. No. Literally almost every single episode is like this, where Zig and Sharko had the issue where they constantly repeated the exact same joke, or Sharko hurts Zig for getting close to Marina. This show has the issue where it constantly gives Bernie a chance to go home, only for it to be taken away from him, due to some emotionally manipulative thing that make him ruin his chance to get back home, due to plot contrivances, and this show really doesn't want Bernie to get home, which is another thing that this show repeats over and over again. Literally almost every single episode involves another character annoying Bernie to death, then expecting the audience to feel sorry for them at the last second. Or even worse, said character can be as stupid as a brick towards his own feelings, or when he literally gets captured in a net in one episode, to a point where he either snaps or accepts his fate. If there's one show that I could actually describe as a series where the main character is put through torment, it's definitely this show right here. I've seen quite a few people who have said that shows like Eek the Cat or Nightmare Ned only exist to put the main characters through torture, to the point where some people, no joke, compared them to Stress Derek, when that's not actually true in the context of the episodes. In fact, Eek the Cat did often give Eek a happy ending at the end of said episode, and stopped focusing on Eek torture in later seasons. And Nightmare Ned only puts Ned through his nightmares as a motivational tool to have him overcome his fear, and he does often have a happy ending. The Adventures of Bernie does not do any of these things. And no, I don't count Bernie doing a good deed for others as a happy ending, because it feels more like a way to guilt trip him into sacrificing his chances of going home when that's all he wants to do. Is the show trying to imply that he's selfish for doing so? What would he even miss if he eventually got home and left these new characters behind? Because let me just say this right now. What makes this show worse than the predecessor series is that almost none of the new characters that they introduced in this show are likable in the slightest, either being annoying or just straight up anger-inducing, which just rubs salt all over an open wound for this series with all of the other issues that I had so far. Admittedly, as you've already heard me say, Zig and Sharko's humor has never been its strongest aspect, but it had the warmth and comfortness for the characters to soften it. The opposite could apply with other shows as well, where Johnny Bravo and Ed, Edd n Eddy were mean-spirited shows, but had the humor to back them up. This show has neither to back it up, because literally all the jokes in this show revolve around Bernie suffering for little to no reason. And I hate nearly every single new character that they introduced into this show. I'm glad that these new characters don't talk, just like with every other character in this franchise, because these new characters are already annoying enough when they don't talk. The only characters in this show that I find somewhat tolerable are that fancy-looking hermit crab named Georges, although they made him sound way too whiny in this show, and his whiny sounds make him sound female, which is why I thought he was a female at first. Though that's mainly because he's one of the only characters in this show that is actually nice to Bernie and doesn't prevent him from going home, except for one episode. And there's also that diving woman named Barbara, although she was incredibly dense in that one episode where Bernie was trying to emphasize the fact that he wanted to go home, but blissfully glossed over that in what seems to be on purpose. Every other character's sole purpose in this show seems to be that it's trying to prevent Bernie from returning to the island, and once again, shows emotional manipulation when he dares to fight back against them or say no. And yet, this show tries to portray them as friends for some reason, when, I'm sorry, a friend does not steal from you or continually try to attack you when rightfully trying to reclaim it from them. Truck Kraken in particular. His one gimmick in this show is that he steals things from others, then when they want the thing he stole back, he begins to attack them for wanting said thing back from them. According to the Zig and Sharko wiki, he's supposed to be an antagonist for Bernie to fight against, which is fair. It does at least give him more of an excuse for why he's somewhat unlikable.
Unlike Gus from Robot Boy or Galileo from Power Players.
But like Master Frown from Unikitty, that doesn't inherently make what he does in most of these episodes acceptable in the slightest. He still gets bad enough to the point where he makes me want all squids to go extinct. It started off rather harmless, with Kraken stealing Bernie's remote control for his rocket, nothing out of the ordinary. Then when we get to the episode The Shell Thief, where Kraken literally steals Bernie and Georges' shells.
To hermit crabs, a shell is like their clothes, and without their shell, they are pretty much naked.
This is where I drew the line. Kraken's actions in this episode are so unacceptable, it makes you wonder why none of the other fish creatures reported him to the underwater police or Poseidon yet. And in another episode, it's also revealed that Marina's starfish,
which is his girlfriend,
has been writing letters to Bernie for what had presumably been months. And this squid right here has been swiping her letters and keeping them as far away and hidden from Bernie as much as possible. Not to mention, he also takes advantage of Bernie in another episode by having him do his chores while he's literally sweating his butt off, and he basically lets Kraken cool off with him when he decides to sacrifice going home again for the billionth time. Why? He literally took advantage of you, not even letting you cool off with the fan for more than a few seconds. Kraken doesn't deserve to have an ending like this. But yeah, if I hadn't made it clear by the tone of the Adventures of Bernie section of this video, I really don't like this show. I'd go so far as to say that this is one of the worst shows that I reviewed so far. Not just in Sean's thoughts, but also Sean's network reviews. Not quite as bad as either Thundercats Roar, Robot Boy, Tom and Jerry Comedy Show, or even Ollie's Pack. Because the animation in this show is at least passable and visually interesting. There's no writing issues that are obvious enough that casual viewers would notice. There's no issues with the background music or sound effects, and it's not quite as annoying or frustrating as those other shows. Especially since the characters don't talk,
even if they are annoying in other ways.
But but it is quite up there with those other 4 shows, I guarantee it. Yes, I am sure that there are definitely worse shows coming up for Sean's Network Reviews that I just didn't get around to binge watching yet, but given some of the others that it's competing against, that's really saying something. As horrible as the series finale of Middle School Moguls was, I could give that show some credit that not every single episode was like that finale, and the Gene Deitch Tom and Jerry shorts at least had some gems if you look hard enough, and that it didn't have every single episode include pet abuse or Clint Clobber's horrible actions. The Adventures of Bernie is exactly that, where almost every single episode has the exact same problem as the last. And it's basically the show that I would describe as the opposite of Zig and Sharko, where that show had enough warmth and comfortness to put you in a good mood. This show is just upsetting and unpleasant, and I would not recommend watching this show if you're in a bad mood. So, for recommendations, just stick with Zig and Sharko. There's enough episodes in the 3 seasons of that series available to hold you over until you watch season 4, because even though it's not funny, it's a feel-good kind of series thanks to its characters. However, please by all means necessary, stay away from the Adventures of Bernie. It's unpleasant, unfunny, obnoxious, and is the type of series to watch if you want to put yourself in a bad mood. Zip Zip is a 2015 French animated show that came to me as a request from an individual that goes by the name of Spidey Fan 1DJ Pizza Boy. That, getting this right out of the way, is very mediocre. Spidey Fan came to me and requested me to take a look at this show because he finds this show to be really bad, and wants me to talk about this show because he discovered my channel. Going into this one, I've actually never heard of this show before. Maybe I might have seen the title of this show while I was doing tons of research in order to find as much material to review for Sean's Network Reviews as I could back in 2022, because I absolutely wanted to get as many shows to review as I could in case I ended up getting requested to review it. Zip Zip legit sounded like a random name that you'd pick out of a hat, which is why I was confused when I first heard the name of this show. Like, what the heck is Zip Zip? Apparently, it's a French animated series that aired internationally, but was never aired in the United States, and the only way you were able to watch it was with the YouTube channel that uploaded episodes for you to be able to watch for free. Normally,
And full disclosure on this, very rarely am I ever going to be breaking away from doing my binge list.
but I decided to check this show out immediately after I did the scripts for my reviews on Kamp, Koral, and the Patrick Star Show, just to see what all the fuss was about. Because Spidey Fan was basically hyping this show up to me as this really awful cartoon that is super annoying, and was asking me non-stop to watch this show while I was occupied with binge-watching the Patrick Star Show. And if you've been following my content, you'd know that I come across a lot of shows that I dislike for being annoying, gross, unpleasant, and painfully boring, like the Tom and Jerry Comedy Show, Family Dog, Robot Boy, Thundercats Roar, the list goes on. And with what Spidey Fan was telling me, I got a feeling that I was not gonna like this cartoon one bit, and so, after taking a moment and watching through every episode that I could find, the conclusion that I've come to is that this show being hyped up to me as being this super awful cartoon was overblown. Because while I don't think that this show is good, in fact, I'd go on to say that it's one of the weakest shows that I reviewed so far, but it really is not that bad. At worst, the show collapses in on itself a lot of the time, but at best, this show was very mid. What's the premise of this show? This show revolves around a fox named Washington, a boar named Sam, a baby boar named Eugenie, and a blackbird named Susie. One day they got fed up living in the forest with all the rain and the lack of being able to find food, so they decided to move into the comforts of suburbia. But because they're not domesticated animals, they decided to dress up as them. Why nobody around them knows that they're actually wild animals dressed up as animals because of their face not being covered up is beyond me, but they managed to fool a couple named the Livingstones into living in this house, along with another house cat named Victoria, in one of the most unusable premises that I've ever seen in a cartoon, also with the most baffling sequences that I've ever seen doing this series so far, which is a not so subtle way of transitioning into one of my biggest problems that I have with this series. The premise of this show is not not only bad, it's one of those concepts that I absolutely in good faith cannot see working in any way whatsoever. And the only way that I could see any of the things happening in this show making it onto the screen is by having everyone in the show be as stupid as possible, regardless of what some people, more specifically a star that is indeed giant, would say. I have no problem with the concept of a show where a certain group of characters keep a secret from their loved one. A show about a kid discovering a world where chalk characters go whenever you erase it on a chalkboard sounds awesome. A show where a kid has a secret laboratory hidden behind his bookshelf? Great. A show about a dog dressing up as a student and going to a school? Very creative. A show where a kid has fairy godparents that is able to grant his every wish? Shut up and take my money. And regardless of what you think of some of these shows, the premise of these shows have some sort of way of being able to keep that secret hidden. And well, that's the problem that I have with Zip Zip. Because of the fact that the premise of this show is so broken that nothing can be salvaged with it, the show more often than not comes up with some of the most baffling writing decisions that I've seen in quite some time. Because this is the type of show that you could only do in one episode and that's it, before having to move on to the next episode where the characters have to do something different now. Because in any other show, the humans would find out that their pets are wild animals at the end of the episode. This was literally a plot in the original Ren and Stimpy, more specifically Big Baby Scam, where Ren and Stimpy pretend to be human babies before the truth gets exposed at the end of the episode. And that was a one and done episode. Ren and Stimpy didn't stay like that for the rest of the series, because if Mr. and Mrs. Pipe could recognize that Ren and Stimpy are pretending to be babies again, then they would not be allowed back in the house. Zip Zip feels like if that one episode of Ren and Stimpy was made into an entire series, but only if the human characters in this show were even more stupid. I've seen shows with the secret identity premise that started off strong with this, but progressively forgot what they established over time, like with Fairly Odd Parents, and how the show continued breaking its rules around seasons 9 and 10, and the live-action movies with Drake Bell, and shows that were always bad with this, like Robot Boy and Ollie's Pack, which constantly did things like this. Zip Zip's problem is the premise in of itself. Like, I could see the idea of a show like this working. This show, in all honesty, reminds me of a certain Oh Yeah cartoon short called Zoo Mates, which was about zoo animals living together in an apartment building, because this one woman thinks that keeping zoo animals in the zoo is considered animal abuse or something, causing the animals to cause all sorts of shenanigans, and regardless of what you feel about that short, it was executed far better than Zip Zip, because the animals didn't need to pretend to be like domesticated animals or humans in order for the plot to happen. It took advantage of the fact that it was animated in spite of the out-of-place laugh track. And if that show did get picked up by Nickelodeon, every episode would have done something like this and wouldn't have to worry about any sort of secret identity that the animals would need to keep. And because the premise of Zip Zip is unsalvageable, the execution fails to make up for it. One of the big problems that this show creates right out the gate are the costumes that the characters wear throughout the series. The only way that you'd be able to be convinced that any of the characters are the animals that they're dressed up as is if you have the exact same IQ as Patrick Star. In other words, the animals in the show do not have masks on to at least obscure their appearances to make them at least look like the animal that they are. Because the face is the most recognizable part of a human or animal's body. I'll tell you right now that a wild boar's face is miles different than a cat's face. And that's the default design that they chose for all the wild animals in this show, including Washington, whom his face is colored orange, despite the fact that his costume was and is always going to be colored brown, and Sam's face is brown, which contrasts with this cat costume, which is blue. Same thing applies to Eugenie. The only one where it's understandable that the other characters think she's a canary and not a blackbird is Susie, considering the fact that she's already a bird, and certain animals in real life do have more than one color on their fur or feathers. The rest of them just no. And what does this show do to make up for the fact that this show doesn't really commit to the idea of the animals fully keeping their appearances obscure? That's simple, really. They made every single character in this show an absolute idiot. No, I'm not even joking. You remember that one joke from Home on the Range, where Alameda Slim's incredibly stupid nephews don't recognize him until after he puts on his glasses? Yeah, that's the level of writing that we get in this show. There's the obvious ones being the Livingstones, as they don't recognize that their pets are wild animals, and they often don't question why a fox or wild boar often gets into their house. And they've seen a fox and wild boar plenty of times to be able to make that distinction. And they literally thought that Mitch was a baby in one episode, and I'm not even kidding, thought that he grew up so fast because Susie removed his bib. But no, every other character in this show is stupid as well. Even Victoria, whom the show portrays as being absolutely intelligent, but yet she couldn't tell that the raccoons have taken the animals' costumes and are now wearing them. I could see Sam acting like this because he's characterized like this, but all of the other characters are like this too. According to this show, the way that you'd be mistaken as a cat or dog is by having the rest of your body except for the face being covered, even though the face is important as well. And as tradition for any show that revolves around any type of character keeping something a secret, this show also fails to do this a lot of the time. While it doesn't get as bad here as it does in Robot Boy or even Ollie's Pack, there are still times where the show gets downright baffling with the many sequences where the characters take their costumes off at the most inconvenient times. And what's more, they often do this in public or in very crowded areas where anyone could see them. The most egregious example being in the dog show episode, where Sam takes off his cat costume in a very crowded area. My goodness, Clark Kent at least chose a phone booth in order to change into Superman, and it's very telling that a lot of the characters are stupid when they often don't recognize when something is either gone out of nowhere or why the fox disappeared out of nowhere. Almost as if this show should have done something else with its premise, like have this show take place on a farm, for example, but that would make this show feel way too similar to something like Back at the Barnyard, and that tells you everything you need to know. As another problem that this show has is that it's essentially just Back at the Barnyard set in a city with more or less a similar feeling tone as Johnny Test. But with Back at the Barnyard, that show never took itself seriously at any point, and was not trying to be this super serious show where animals live among humans. The farm animals were just farm animals whom, while yes, dressed up like humans to do mundane things, the show was basically a comedy all the way through, so the humans being stupid in the show was part of the joke. Meanwhile, Zip Zip is too tame to tell whenever it's trying to take itself seriously at points, making it to where the show's problems are inexcusable. And is this show funny? I honestly don't know. A lot of the time, it's hard to tell whether the show is trying to do something humorous or comedic, because the comedy is just non-existent. In the second episode I watched, When Pigs Fly, when Sam and Washington try to find Eugenie because she tied herself to balloons, every single thing or person they try to talk to ends up shooting peas at them. How is this even funny? Isn't it technically established in the show that humans can't understand animals? Or what they also like to do in the show is have its characters do something cringe-inducing out of nowhere. The Double Dare episode, for example, starts off with the Livingstones daring each other to do something humiliating, Mr. Livingstone belly dancing, and Mrs. Livingstone acting like a monkey. That's not funny. That's just cringe-inducing. And in the episode where the raccoons basically take over Washington's life, they out of nowhere ask Sam to do a belly dance. There's no setup, nor is there any sort of reason for why they're asking him to do this. It's just random. Oh, and one other running gag that I really don't like in this show, that I could definitely see other people not liking either, is this one male cat who constantly tries to push himself onto Victoria, or at least it's portrayed as a joke, but there's no punchline to it. With Chowder, that show has the iconic, "I'm not your boyfriend" line. The only joke that I could assume that this show is trying to push is that sexual harassment is inherently a joke when it really isn't. And this isn't even like a product of its time, where it was written in an older decade where people didn't question these things as much as they do now. This show literally came out in 2015, so it was fairly recent. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if this show did eventually air on TV in the United States, and they decided to outright ban the episodes that feature this male cat, and or cut the sequences that include him, because he's literally in the neighborhood racing episode. I'd feel bad for Victoria, because not only is she the target of this male cat, she's also the target of Mitch, whom, in the episode that I talked about earlier, basically holds and squeezes her to the point where she feels uncomfortable. But that's incredibly hard to do so, because getting onto the topic of the characters and by extension, the voice acting real quick, I really don't like Victoria in this show. I understand that she just wanted to be left alone, so a lot of what she does is the result of the characters not giving her any sort of peace or quiet, but there are several times in this show where she can go off the deep end in regards to her attitude and actions. In the very first episode I watched, Terror ID, she acts incredibly apathetic towards the fact that Sam was about to have his secret get revealed by the neighborhood kids, and she doesn't really get any better from there. I'd even say that she gets worse as the series goes on, to the point where it gets so bad that it makes it incredibly difficult to feel sorry for her. And it's even revealed in the origin episode that she only decided to let the wild animals stay because of some sort of selfishness regarding not wanting Nugget and Fluffy to stay at the Livingstone's house for the summer. One of my least favorite episodes with her is Party Animals, where she, by her own admission, decides to give Washington and Sam misleading advice because she doesn't like Nugget and Fluffy for reasons that are not even explained. She also decides to coerce the easily manipulatable Sam into letting her stalker target him just so that he would leave her alone. And when she deliberately decides to knock down Mrs. Livingstone's art project in Just Like New, causing the others to get unnecessarily stressed out for no other reason than the fact that, oh, Eugenie, Susie, and Sam were being loud. Okay, but the Livingstones should not have to suffer because of it. Not helping in her favor is that she sounds exactly like Twilight Sparkle from MLPFIM, even though she's voiced by Tiffany Hofstetter, although listening to the voice for a while, I thought that she was voiced by Tara Strong. I also don't like Sam in this show because he's obnoxious with how cliche he is. Not only does he speak in a very stereotypical manner that a dumb person would talk like, he's also the fat character who likes to eat stereotype. Yeah, that was done by absolutely no one. That is except Heifer Wolf from Rocko's Modern Life, Mikey from Recess, Patrick Star from SpongeBob SquarePants, Gus Turner from Robot Boy, Chowder from Chowder, Richard Watterson from The Amazing World of Gumball, etc. And they don't do anything with him to really subvert him all that much. Which reminds me, the voice acting in this show is not good. In fact, one problem that I frequently noticed while watching this show, and I don't know if it was the audio balancing on the videos being put on YouTube, is actually the audio quality of the series in general, where sometimes it would be at a high level, but other times, it would be so low that I had to turn the volume up extremely high to hear anything. While the voices in this show don't get nearly as bad as they did in Robot Boy, where nearly every single character in that show sounded bland or downright unbearable, this show doesn't have that. I wasn't really annoyed all that much with the voices, but there are a few that really do get grating the more you listen to it. The vet in particular sounds absolutely ridiculous, and Alvarez and his owner have this very stereotypical sounding snooty voice to them that is just obnoxious. And on top of that, both of them sound exactly the same and obviously have the exact same voice actor. Like, could they not have gotten two separate voice actors to do the voices of these guys? I mean, Eugenie and Susie, while they sound very often too high-pitched in the series, it's obvious that they have two different voice actresses. Alvarez and his owner sounds exactly alike. I guess because apparently every single rich person sounds snooty, am I right? Despite the fact that no, they really don't. But with all of what I've been pointing out with this show, why do I still find this show to be mid exactly? Well, yes, the premise of the show is absolutely terrible, and the characters could be very unlikable at times. Outside of all of that, there's not really all that much to really get mad at with this show. Shows like Robot Boy and Ollie's Pack are far worse, because not only do they have horrible executions, they also have unlikable characters and disgusting content to go along with them. With Zip Zip, well, the characters are only really unlikable in some episodes, and the horrible writing only really shows up every once in a while, because most of the time, Zip Zip is a very mid show that you could just watch and not really feel all that much in regards to the show. Heck, not even boredom, as this show did somewhat keep my attention throughout, which is more than I can say with other shows I reviewed like Power Players and Kamp Koral, or even shows I've yet to get to like the 2015 Alvin and the Chipmunks show. Even the animation in this show is just okay, but not bad either. The character designs do look good, and the animation in general is at least pleasant to look at, both in motion and how they look. Even though I would have preferred if they did the show in hand-drawn rather than have the animation be rigged, because the characters and stills do honestly give out the feeling that the series should have been done in hand-drawn, especially since this show is very slapstick-driven, and unlike Puka, all the characters do look like they belong in a show that is supposed to be Looney Tunes-esque. And the animation and the designs just don't go together at all. Granted, it's better than the animation in Fairly Odd Parents Season 10, but it does largely have the same jarring results. But honestly, that's all I have to really say about Zip Zip. It's mediocre at best, and conceptually broken at worst. And with what Spidey fan 1DJ Pizza Boy has been telling me about this show, I was expecting to get something really bad out of this show, something that I would remember for years on end, like the Tom and Jerry comedy show, Family Dog, Robot Boy, The Wild, Ivan the Incredible, Walking with Dinosaurs 2013, Monster Family, Lewis and the Aliens, Thundercats Roar, etc. But it's just not. It's one of the most 5 out of 10 shows that I could ever think of. And as of the time that I'm scripting this, he basically said that he doesn't blame me for finding this show to be painful. Like, he's right on one thing. This show is painful in the sense that it's painfully average, in the exact same vein as Power Players, Bucky O'Hare, Clutter, etc. This show is still better than Power Players because I wasn't as bored with this one, but it's one of those shows that the only way I'm gonna remember it for years on end is by looking back at this review. Back in 2014, while I was watching clips of the Steven Universe episode Fusion Cuisine, at the bottom of the screen, I saw the screen bug for this little show that goes by the name of Over the Garden Wall, and since then, I've been hearing left and right about the glowing praise that the show would get. Although, something to note about this show before I went in, is that prior to me watching this show for this review, I've actually never seen this show before. Maybe a few scattered clips here and there from reviews, but I didn't get around to watching this show yet at the time, primarily because of the fact that I wasn't really interested, as well as the fact that by the time of November of 2014, I didn't have cable, and I had very limited internet. That was also around the time when I was in a school play, and I was more interested in things like SpongeBob, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2012, and Steven Universe. So I wasn't very interested in watching this show, but that was until I decided to make a giant list of shows that I would consider reviewing for Sean's network reviews. One of the first shows on that giant list of shows,
besides Middle School Moguls and the Gene Deitch Tom and Jerry shorts,
was Over the Garden Wall. And that's because I wanted to get a lot of reviewing material of shows to clear out any possible reviewing materials that people would ask me to review, and sort them out by their episode number, and organize them into 2 categories from shortest to biggest. So, if there's anyone who was wondering about the shows that you requested, there you go. They're extremely far ahead because they're organized by the amount of episodes they have, and my marathoning schedule is going in a pattern. And I predicted that some people would ask me if I could do a review on some of these shows, like My Life Me, and I told them that it's on the giant list of shows that I will review, and it will be a while until I get to it. But getting back to Over the Garden Wall, I watched this show a few hours after I got done with the script for my review on Kappa Mikey, and the overall results? Wow. This show is amazing. Remember the story that I just told that I didn't watch this show back then and wasn't interested? Well, I now wish I was interested in this show back then, because marathoning the series in preparations for my review on it, I instantly got hooked and interested on what was going to happen next after each episode. For Sean's network reviews, I obviously wouldn't put this show at the top of my ranking, because shows like Oban Star Racers, Puka, and OKKO Let's Be Heroes are at the same level of good, but they were a little longer and had more than just 5 half hours worth of episodes to its belt, but I definitely put this show in the top 4 for now. It doesn't beat out the top 3, but it definitely beats out the other 3. What's the concept of this show? This show revolves around 2 kids, the older one named Wirt and the little brother named Greg. On one particular night during Halloween, Wirt and Greg ended up getting lost in a forest where they encountered a bunch of strange creatures
that aren't what they seem on the surface level.
One of these creatures that is actually a threat in this show is this dark shadowy monster named the Beast. And accompanying them is this blue bird named Beatrice, who was originally a human until she accidentally angered a witch that turned her and her family into birds. The concept of this miniseries on the surface level of things does kind of sound simple and straightforward, but as I continued watching, I was completely engaged with the show, and was interested in what was going to happen next. And while the show does have a lot of dark themes and intense situations, it balances these things out with lightheartedness, which already makes this show a step up from Code Lyoko, which, while it was also dark, it could be a little too dark and depressing at times, to a point where there's not enough lightheartedness to soften things up. But Over the Garden Wall has that covered right away. I might as well start things off with the thing that you might notice about this show, and that is the animation. Around the time that this show started airing on Cartoon Network, the shows that Cartoon Network put out didn't really look all that special, as for the most part, they often used something that I'd like to nickname the bean mouth style.
And no, I'm not calling it the Cal art style, because that name was coined by John Kay, who used it towards Disney, and used it against other animators who took influence from Disney, not people who were using bean mouths.
And each of these shows in particular didn't really do anything special with the backgrounds or outlines to spice things up. The only ones that really did this was The Amazing World of Gumball and Uncle Grandpa, but for the most part, they stuck to one specific look, with shows like Steven Universe, Clarence, and We Bare Bears looking pretty similar to each other. In regards to Over the Garden Wall, while on the surface of things, it does have an art style that looks pretty standard for a Cartoon Network show in the 2010s, and the character designs look pretty basic. Wirt's nose is literally just a triangle. The animation in this show is beautiful. A little known fact about Over the Garden Wall is that the creator of the show, Patrick McHale, initially pitched the show to Cartoon Network in 2006 as a Halloween special, but turned it down initially. But Patrick McHale didn't give up, and decided to stay at Cartoon Network for a couple of years, and while he was there, he was a writer on episodes of The Marvelous and Misadventures of Flapjack and Adventure Time. And from looking at the animation in this miniseries and the writing, I can really tell that Patrick McHale thought through all the nooks and crannies of this series, because the animation in this show is literally a work of art. The show uses a ton of dark colors and gritty surroundings. The show is set in a forest that has a ton of unknown creatures popping up left and right, but they more often than not end up being not what they seem. So it's also a show that is pretty much a showcase of the term, don't judge a book by its cover. The only ones that do seem to be a threat are these pumpkin people and the Beast. And the show at times also shows that it has an old rubber hose aesthetic to it, which is fitting since these locations have an old village feeling to it, which also enhances the rubber hose aesthetic to the show. Visually speaking, the best visuals come from the episode Babes in the Wood, because the visuals in Greg's dream is eye-catching, and is pretty much a modern-day equivalent of a rubber hose cartoon, basically being Cuphead before Cuphead even came out. But the show also has a ton of other elements that basically balances out the rubber hose feeling to also make the show feel modern as well. And as I said at the beginning, Over the Garden Wall is a dark show, but it makes sure to also add a bit of lightheartedness to make the show become bearable to watch in one sitting. There are some shows out there that have very little substance that I just stop watching after 1 or 2 episodes and just resume the next day, like Power Players, and there are others that are good, but they could get so heavy that watching 2 episodes is enough to fill me for a day, like Code Lyoko. Over the Garden Wall is one of the first shows that I've watched in a very long time that I was hooked the entire way through, and would wonder what would happen next after watching a specific episode. I'll admit that there are some stumps that the show does run into once in a while. The 5th episode is literally just pointless, and the 9th episode completely distracts from the story after something huge has happened, as well as the fact that the 4th episode spends its time doing nothing, but these episodes are not that bad in the grand scheme of things. The worst that the show could get is the 5th episode, which wastes most of its time with characters derping around in this mansion, with Beatrice being uncharacteristic, and the tone just doesn't fit for a show like Over the Garden Wall, and you would miss nothing if you just skipped to episode 6. I've seen way worse episodes of plenty of shows, even from shows that I consider good. Which brings me into talking about something that makes this show shine, that being the writing and the characters. Right out the gate in the 1st episode, when we meet this crazy guy in the woods who warned Wirt and Greg about the beast, it brings in a lot of suspense about what's going to happen, and then bam, we get a monster that attempts to eat our main characters, which led me to believe that this is the beast that this dude was speaking of, which subverted my expectations when I first saw it, but as it turns out, that the beast is much bigger than they could ever imagine. And then the show continues on as the story unfolds, and we meet a bunch of characters that aren't what they seem. Like for example, in the 3rd episode that involves this school that doesn't feel right, it's revealed that this school's teacher's father is actually in major financial debt, so Wirt, Greg, and Beatrice put together this fundraiser band to help get as much money as he could to get out of financial debt. And in another episode, the 7th episode, The Ringing of the Bell, from the looks of it, you expect Auntie Whispers, this giant beastly looking woman, to be a threat, as she basically says that she would eat Wirt and Greg when she finds them, but as it turns out, that isn't true. The actual threat is Lorna, because she's possessed by a ghost that Wirt and Greg need to make sure is exorcised out of her body. And as for the characters, it's a case of don't judge a book by its cover, and once you spend a lot of time with them, the more I actually grow to like them. Wirt is one of the most relatable characters ever. In the 1st episode and throughout the mini-series, they establish him as the older sibling to Greg that is basically the opposite of him. Wirt is the more level-headed and responsible one, while Greg is the more naive and happy-go-lucky in nature one. But the writers made sure to not go too far with it to make Wirt look like a jerk, and he's socially awkward instead, which does make him work much better. He's actually a character that I personally relate to a lot, as I'm also someone who is very quiet, as well as someone who stutters in public when I'm in public, and is very shy around a big group of people. Greg is pretty much the SpongeBob of this show, being a character that is generally happy-go-lucky and innocent, but being a calm kind of optimistic character. Still being naive and having a positive outlook on life, but isn't too loud about it. Although his voice does sound exactly like Lincoln Loud from the Loud House. That's Colin Dean doing the voice for the record. And yes, he also voiced Lincoln Loud. Beatrice is another character that could be considered as the responsible one of the show. However, halfway through the series, she does have imperfections of her own, such as in the 6th episode where it's revealed that she was secretly using Wirt and Greg to help her get back to normal, but she quickly regrets doing it when she started forming a close bond with them. And while I do believe that episode 5 is definitely the weakest episode of the series, it definitely shows that Beatrice does have points where she can be selfish too. And to round out the cast of characters, the Woodsman is one of those characters that you could classify as the crazy guy that basically tries to warn Wirt and Greg about the beast, but in actuality, he tries to lure Wirt and Greg to safety because the beast is after them, and he doesn't want what happened to his daughter to also happen to Wirt and Greg. I'm sorry I didn't have a lot to really say about Over the Garden Wall. This video was definitely the hardest script for me to work on in Sean's network reviews so far, but with the show that only has 10 episodes with 5 half hours worth of material, it does become a little difficult to find a lot to really say about a show without repeating yourself. So my recommendation for Over the Garden Wall is to definitely check this show out if you have the chance to. It's definitely a show to watch if you want something that would make you be at the edge of your seat, definitely being one of the perfect shows to watch during Halloween, just be sure to know that episode 5 is pointless, and episode 9 is just a filler episode. This was definitely not a Sean's Network Reviews episode I was expecting to have little to say about. Maybe the next show I'll be reviewing will give me more things to talk about. I don't know, but I'll see you guys next time. Bucky O'Hare and the Toad Wars is a 1991 animated series based on a comic of the same name that, needless to say, is another show that I have very little to talk about. Yep, I'm basically pulling an over the garden wall on this show, where this review will end up being straight to the point, because of how very few materials there is to work with. Now, this review comes as a request from someone that I'll keep his name out of my mouth for reasons that I won't disclose right now. In 2022, he requested me to review Bucky O'Hare and the Toad Wars, and I said that I would. However, for a while at the time, I ended up putting this review to the side, mainly because of the fact that the first half of 2022 was absolutely exhausting for me, as well as getting writer's block, and occupying myself extremely hard with the spin-off series Sean's Yearly Reviews. However, even though yes, for personal reasons, I'm not gonna mention him, I did promise him that I would get around to reviewing this show at some point, and a promise is a promise. And I wanted to get this show right out of the way so that I could get to watching the shows that are on my binge list. And now that I finished watching Bucky O'Hare and the Toad Wars, what do I think about it? I'll be completely honest when I say this right now. When I first started watching a few episodes back in 2022, before I got really sidetracked, I thought that my overall thoughts on the show just being fine was due to the fact that 2022 burned me out. But now that I fully decided to watch all the episodes, when I'm in the calm state of mind that I'm in right now, that wasn't the burnt state of mind talking. Those are my actual thoughts on this show. So, what is this show about? Well, the best way to sum up the show is this. Imagine taking an isekai and fuse it with Star Wars. And that's basically what you get with Bucky O'Hare. The show, from what I've been hearing, is based on a comic, and from what I've been hearing during a voice call with
Name redacted.
from what I remember, is that there are some very notable differences between the comic and the show. One of them being, for instance, in the first episode, where the chimp character named Bruce ended up getting transported to another dimension. In the comic, he ends up getting killed off. End of story. But similar to what I did with Thundercats Roar, in regards to me reviewing this show, I'm not going to judge it by how it is as an adaptation, I'm judging it by its own merit. The plot of this show is extremely simple. This rabbit named Bucky O'Hare and his gang of animal buddies basically does the exact same thing that the title of the show suggests, in that the characters basically go to war with their enemies, the Toads. And that's pretty much the entire show, up until the last episode, where we're given an ending about Bucky O'Hare's home planet being in everlasting peace thanks to him. Now, at first, I thought that me struggling to find very many things to say about this show was because watching through shows like Code Lyoko and Kappa Mikey took the most out of me, since both of those shows took me nearly half a year to complete, since they both had more than the average lengths of a TV show. But I ended up being proven wrong with some of the animated movies that I ended up reviewing on my channel, like Rock Dog or the Tom and Jerry movie from 2021. And then when going into watching this show, I proved to myself that it wasn't the burnout that was talking. One of the major issues that I have with this show is a very similar problem that I had with Power Players, where throughout my watch through of each episode of the series, the show fails to really get me invested with what's going on, or do something noteworthy. There's nothing in this show that is noticeably good, except for the action sequences, but as proven by what I said towards Power Players, that's not really something that improves the overall quality, while at the exact same time, there's nothing really bad about it either. And that is what makes reviewing something bland a lot harder to talk about than something that I dislike, because I'd have something to say about the show or movie, as opposed to something like this. Another major issue that I have with this show is that for a series that is pretty much what you could consider as one of the first isekai shows, at least in the United States, it does very little to really take advantage of the fact that it's an isekai show, and that the character that this show is basically pulling an isekai with does very little in the show itself. Willie DeWitt is not a very interesting character in the slightest. He's basically just the genius character that tags along with the others. He's good at repairing things, but there is literally no point in having this be an isekai if Willie is able to go back into the real world at any time he needs to. In fact, you could literally turn him into an animal and have him be a regular engineer for the team, and literally nothing would change at all. And in fact, for most of the show, he hardly has any sort of purpose to really be in this show. Comparing this show to its younger siblings real quick, Amphibia and the Owl House, what makes those shows work is that while yes, you could have hypothetically made Anne and Luz always be a part of the worlds that they were teleported to, they served a purpose in the shows that they came from. And what's more, Anne and Luz ended up being the ones who saved their world. Willie, on the other hand, does not. In fact, for most of the show, Willie takes a back seat most of the time, and no joke, does not start becoming important until the 9th episode of the series. But by then, it's far too late to really start doing this, because the fatal issue that they made in this show is that Bucky O'Hara himself is entirely competent and barely so much as get captured like Ida from the Owl House did, or how Sprig, Polly, and Hop Hop did in Amphibia. But that's kind of the nature of this show, and why I honestly struggle to really find all that much to really say about it. This show is very much a product of its time, as in, the show was still sort of in the era before the animation renaissance of the 90s kicked in. This show only premiered a month after the first 3 Nicktoons premiered, and animation does take a while to get done. So this show was probably done when the trends of the 80s were about ready to be over.
You could probably tell since the show is kind of similar to TMNT, which was another action show about anthro-animal characters.
And it kind of shows here, given that the characters are uninteresting, and the animation does have that kind of feeling in it. Although, a lot of the ideas in this show I have seen done better elsewhere, but it was from a different era, so I can't be too mad at it. But then again, the Nickelodeon version of Doug came out the exact same year as this show, and similarly did things that other shows would do better later on. But unlike Doug, I'm pretty sure that shows like Amphibia and the Owl House would have existed even without this show. But I don't want to be too harsh on this show because it is generally harmless, and unlike most of the other shows that I reviewed on my channel, this one doesn't have anything that personally bothered me, but it got up to the point where I just couldn't really write anything of note about this show because there was just nothing to really say about it. But even if I do consider this show to be average, I do have interest in seeing what a modern reboot would be like if this show was made today, since animation had come a long way since 1991, and with the right crew, there could be a chance for it to turn out amazing. DuckTales 2017 was able to do this, so I'm pretty sure that Bucky O'Hare could do this as well. So, in regards to Sean's network reviews, obviously speaking, this show is better than Power Players and Clutter, because I could get through this entire show without getting frustrated, but I doubt that I would really watch this show again. If any of what I said about this show interests you in any sort of way, this show might be up your alley. Though, according to an individual whom I'll nickname Anon Pink, this show is actually considered a cult classic and a show that was cut too early. If you ever wanted to see what an animated Star Wars show would have been like if it was released in the late 80s to early 90s, this show may get your attention, but given that I got sidetracked while trying to watch through every episode until just recently, I have the feeling that this exact same thing will happen again after this review is over. I mean, the theme song is an absolute banger, admittedly.
Bucky! Captain Bucky O'Hare! Mutants and aliens and toads beware! You're looking for adventure, well this is it! With Jenny, Deadeye, Blinky, and Willie to win!
But as for the series, I'm just gonna stick with Amphibia instead of this. But if you want a much better version of this show, Sonic Sat AM is basically that, given that the characters are given more screen time, as well as having more character development. While this show is just kind of forgettable. So, when it comes to Aquaman King of Atlantis, I'll be honest as I can, I don't have a lot to really say about this show. Back in 2021, you may have remembered when I talked about my thoughts on Thundercats Roar. It was a show that was so bad to the point where I literally went on for 50 minutes about how bad it is. And during that review, I mentioned at the time that there was an upcoming Aquaman series that uses the exact same art style as Thundercats Roar. Why did it take me a while for me to get around to this show? Well, I was busy drawing, and not to mention, I was basically burnt out by everything that happened that year, that I didn't get back to marathoning this show until November came around. And I basically pushed myself into finishing Power Players in preparations for my review on that show. And then I went on to marathon Code Lyoko and Kappa Mikey, which basically took me until June to complete. But I then made a huge binge list of shows to marathon in a specific order, so that I knowed right away how long that a specific show was, and Aquaman King of Atlantis just so happened to be one of the earlier shows on that binge list, after Long Live the Royals and Family Dog. And well, the reason as to why I bring up Thundercats Roar when starting up this review is because unlike Thundercats Roar, where that show had so many problems that I had to make almost an hour-long video to go over every single issue that I had with that show, Aquaman King of Atlantis is kind of the opposite, in that the show has the least amount of substance to bring up out of every single show I reviewed so far, to the point where there's only one thing that I can really bring up about this show.
And don't worry, I'll be doing that in just a second.
But before then, what is Aquaman King of Atlantis about? This show revolves around the DC character of the exact same name. He must prove to his kingdom of people that he's able to be trusted, so in 2 out of 3 of the episodes of this show, he alongside his girlfriend named Mara,
Yeah, that's basically who she is, since the show hints at it at points,
must go on rescue missions in order to stop these bad guys who have their hands on 2 crystals that can't be close to each other. Throw in this running theme of Aquaman needing to beat his brother in a battle for the throne, and that's basically all you really get for the plot of this show. What I will say about this show is this. This show is a massive improvement from Thundercats Roar, though that was kind of easy to do in the first place, because one of the biggest issues that I did have with Thundercats Roar was that it was absolutely obnoxious. The show had very little moments where it could settle down and just relax for a second, on top of the fact that the characters were either unlikable or were the target of the show torturing repeatedly.
specifically Tigra.
But when it comes to Aquaman King of Atlantis, the show didn't really have any moments where it annoyed me as badly. I mean, there were some major problems that I did have while watching the show. For instance, how Aquaman is portrayed at some points in the show is honestly kind of off-putting. Like, he didn't see that Volko was trying to butter up Aquaman in order to throw him and Mera into the hole he created. And also, Aquaman himself does act like a bit of a child at some points, specifically in episode 2, where he goes on a rant about how bad his day was before kicking a part of the island. And also, Mera does sort of give me vibes of Chitara from Thundercats Roar, in the fact that she acts all aggressive and stuff, but I didn't mind her as much, especially because unlike Chitara, she does have self-control, and she does show that she does have a soft spot at points. So, on that front, I do think that this show is alright. But there is one thing that is holding this show back. Back during my review on Thundercats Roar, I brought up the animation and how extremely unfinished it was, alongside the other factors, like how the show is selective with backgrounds, the show thought that exaggerated facial expressions were inherently jokes, and how the characters randomly went dot-eyed at certain moments. Well, in regards to Aquaman King of Atlantis, this problem is not nearly as bad as it was in Thundercats Roar. I mean, nothing as egregious as what we've seen in an episode like Lost Sword. Instead, this show actually created a new problem for itself entirely. Because even though, yes, this show is a lot more toned down in its hyperactivity than Thundercats Roar, this show now has the problem where the animation is trying so desperately hard to make the viewers laugh that it now makes the show very distracting to look at while watching. This show somehow has more off-model expressions than Thundercats Roar did. did. And that was a show that was actively trying to make its viewers laugh, but it failed in every single regard. In regards to this show in specific, it honestly feels as if the show was given writers that wrote something drastically different than what the animators wanted, though they tried to compensate this by filling every single crevice with wacky expressions for every single expression that a character makes, despite the fact that this show takes itself more seriously than Thundercats Roar. Now yes, a show like OKKO Let's Be Heroes also has wacky expressions, but at the exact same time, OKKO knew how to pick normal expressions for moments when the characters took a moment to relax. Aquaman King of Atlantis does this in nearly every single sequence of the show. Also, like Lewis in the Aliens, this show completely misses the point of contrast by not knowing which characters they should make look more friendly than the other, because the human characters do not look appealing in the slightest. There are several shots where they go too far off model not to notice, and whenever the show is not trying desperately hard to make you laugh with the expressions, they look very ugly. Not in a way where it's charming, it's just unappealing to the eyes. They also managed to make Mira ugly too, and that's something that I just don't get at all. Maybe it's because they gave her those Groucho Marx unibrows, and that she doesn't have any design choices to make her look like the gender that she's supposed to look like. And there are also points where the show gets grossly over-detailed that it's hard not to notice, almost feeling like the show wants to mimic those 1980s shows where everything was detailed, but as I stated beforehand, pineapple being on pizza just does not mix well together, and neither does the details that this show put on some of its characters. These out of place and weird stuff that they do for the human characters completely ruins the contrast that it's supposed to give out, because this show has sea monsters and otherworldly creatures that, to be blunt, was what they should have applied to the human characters while giving the otherworldly creatures what the human characters have in this show. Because these creatures are supposed to be jarring and off-putting, but for whatever reason, they actually don't have this, and are actually more appealing to watch on screen than the human characters. And I just don't get that at all. But what I will say about this show is that it is better than Thundercats Roar, and is honestly not even a show that I considered bad. But it is still in the alright section on my Sean's Network Reviews ranking, because there's just nothing else to comment on with this show. And considering the fact that at the time that I'm writing this, I just got done watching through what is actually one of the worst shows that I reviewed, that really is saying something, because I was not looking forward to watching this show, while Family Dog, I went in blind and got something truly horrendous. That just shows how expectations would end up working for people. So, Family Dog is a show that, back in 2022, I added to my large list of shows that I would take a look at for Sean's Network Reviews. Basically, as one of the earlier entries, given that this show was one of the shorter shows on my huge binge list. And in retrospect, if I was not as thoroughly exhausted as I was at the end of 2022, this show would have been one of the angry reviews. Sorry to spoil this review extremely soon before getting into it, but this show is awful. No exaggeration. Like, I knew when getting back into binge-watching shows that I was going to run into shows that I would end up disliking, and not only did I run into one of these shows that I dislike heavily, sooner than I imagined that I would, but I didn't expect that it would be one of the worst shows I'd ever run into. Oh yeah, I'm going there. Not only is this one of the worst shows that I reviewed in Sean's Network Reviews so far, but it's also a contender for the worst cartoons of the 1990s, and possible considerations for one of the worst cartoons that I've ever seen, period. So, what's this show about? Well, this show revolves around Megward the Wizard in dog form, created by Brad Bird and was produced by Steven Spielberg of all people. He lives in a dysfunctional household, because this was around the era when several people tried to cash in on The Simpsons' popularity, because it apparently worked so well when other shows were trying to cash in on Ren and Stimpy as well, and the dog in particular has to go through literal torture in literally every single episode of the series. And that's not even an exaggeration. That's the most generous view of the show that I could give. To describe the exact issue that I have with this show, how can I describe the show in the best way I could. Take one of the worst SpongeBob episodes. I'm talking A Pal for Gary, Pet Sitter Pat, and even episodes that aren't even bad, but have the aspect of SpongeBob not understanding what Gary wants, and then fuse it with stressed Eric. That's what Family Dog is about. The best word to use to describe Family Dog is unfair. Now, the word mean-spirited gets tossed around a lot. It's a word that is used to describe something that has an aura to it where something is mean, to the point where it would make you become frustrated. But it's also a word that has kind of lost its meaning, because oftentimes, this word would be used as a weapon against shows that are liked in spite of this. And I personally do have a few shows that I like in spite of this. As I stated before, people have written off shows like Eek the Cat and Nightmare Ned, even though those shows were able to throw in elements to help out their mean-spirited angle, to not make it something to really affect them that badly. So, with that being said, Family Dog is one of those shows that definitely falls into the category of being a problem with this. And no amount of, ooh, you're taking this show too seriously, is going to help this show out in the long run. Because unlike some other shows that have this, where you could argue that they do it for comedic purposes, even some infamous shows like Coconut Fred Fruit Salad Island, the way that this show depicts this mean-spirited angle is in a way where it's not at all comedic. In fact, this show is honestly what it would have been like if Courage the Cowardly Dog was executed in a way where it was realistic, which automatically makes this show 10 times more scarier than Courage. And I mean that in a bad way. For the simple fact that this show is what I could consider as a torture porn show. And this torture porn show is happening to a realistic depiction of a dog, not an exaggerated version of the dog. But I'd honestly have to state right now that this is arguably one of the worst torture porn shows that I've ever seen. Because even in shows like Cat Dog or Stressed Eric, while yes, the characters in those shows get the short end of the stick a lot of the time, the characters that do get this torment have the ability to fight back against those who hurt them. The Family Dog in this show doesn't have the ability to do that, making it feel very one-sided, as well as how extremely sad it is at the same time. The moments in this series that are specifically egregious are the points where, to give context, the Family Dog is in love with this other female dog, and there are repeated moments in the series where they teased him being able to make love with her, only to then take it away from him, as well as giving him an opportunity to find him a new owner in the 9th episode, as in, she's a lot more caring to him than his actual family, only to then proceed to take it away from him because her boyfriend doesn't like dogs. Which is kind of sad when thinking about it, because she cares more about him than his actual family does. But honestly, that is nothing compared to the fact that every single character in this show is an absolute jerk. I honestly have no clue why this dog continues to stay with his owners, because of the simple fact that they don't treat him like he's a living being who deserves as much love as everyone else in the family. No, they treat him like property rather than someone to treat with respect. Going back to the 9th episode real quick, they're not concerned about their dog because they love him. They treat him like an object, which is entirely plausible given that the 7th episode gives us a flashback showing that his family only got him because the younger and more naive Billy chose him. It would be one thing if the dog in specific was a jerk that you'd love to hate. That's why Sylvester from Looney Tunes is such a lovable antagonist. But because this dog is depicted as a normal dog in this show, he's not a jerk at all. He's just a regular dog that, to be honest, I think deserves to be with a much better family than these guys. Heck, at this point, this dog would be better off staying with Muriel and Eustace than this family. Because even though these guys act as if they care about their dog, they certainly don't show it at all in this show. I mean, yeah, in some episodes, Bev tells Billy to stop teasing the dog, and at the very least, they tell Billy to keep an eye on him, but those moments where they show any sort of care towards him are very rare, because before that, the show constantly feels the need to have them yell at him. And because the dog can't talk at all, nor is he anthropomorphic, he can't defend himself at all, adding an extra layer of awful to this series. The entire plot of the first episode is about this, where the dog is incredibly thirsty, and he's unable to communicate his wants and needs to his family, all while the show constantly teases him, making him think he's finally going to get water, only to then completely take it away from him. And this even goes past the first episode. Bev and Skip, In nearly every single sequence of this show, whenever they so much as see the family dog being a dog, they constantly act like Eustace Bagg by calling him a stupid dog. Yes, dogs do need to have discipline whenever they do something wrong. And yes, he does do wrong things in this show, but most of the stuff that he does in this show were by pure accident or through him not knowing any better. And at many other points, this could be taken way too far. Billy is a character that, to be blunt, deserves to be signed up for military school or should be taken away from his enabling parents. Because there is clearly something wrong with this child, and the parents seem to not be doing anything about him, which is extremely concerning. When it gets up to the point where he's playing with fire, to the point of leaving it in his trash, causing a house fire in the process, it clearly shows how psychotic this child is. And I don't buy the idea that he would be concerned with the fact that he killed a mother bird after terrorizing everyone during a winter snow day, because this seems right up his alley, because of how downright psychotic he is. Heck, in episode 4, he along with the rest of the family act incredibly apathetic towards how fearful the family dog is around the neighbor's new dog, K10. Billy being the most apathetic by repeatedly being excited to the idea of K10 eating the family dog. Like, what on earth is this kid's problem? And as I mentioned earlier in this review, the way that this show depicts the dog that it's downright torturing for most of the series as realistic is a serious problem with the show. But another major issue that I have with this series is that it feels halfway stuck between wanting to be realistic and wanting to be all exaggerated at the exact same time, which creates this massive tonal problem in the series, where the dog is able to do things that aren't believable, despite being depicted as being realistic. This is honestly why I think that they should have made the family dog more anthropomorphized, being more like how Spike from Tom and Jerry was, to make things more exaggerated so that it wouldn't be as difficult to watch. There's a reason as to why people don't like the early Tom and Jerry shorts, because listening to a realistic cat in pain is not pleasant to watch in a cartoon show. And that's exactly the kind of feeling that I get from this show. And on top of this show being a torture porn series, this show is so obnoxious. One thing that I don't get from the 7th episode of this series is how the other characters can be annoyed by this music that these beach delinquents are blasting out loud when the entirety of the series is like this. And to be as clear as day, this show's obnoxiousness doesn't necessarily come from the fact that this show has grating voice acting or loud noises, like Thundercat's roar or Robot Boy. No, this show being as annoying as it is, comes from the characters and how they frequently talk over and argue with each other, as well as throwing in a bunch of grating sound effects, because it's already enough that this show tortures an innocent animal, similarly to Stressed Eric, but did they seriously have to throw in the obnoxiousness and sound effects too? Is this show trying to make me mad or something? No. This show is one of the worst. It's definitely not the worst show that I reviewed in Sean's Network reviews so far, but it's definitely bottom 10 material worthy. The Gene Deitch Tom and Jerry shorts, The Adventures of Bernie, Ollie's Pack, even the Tom and Jerry comedy show. They're all better than whatever this show is. I may not be a dog person myself, I'm more of a cat person myself, but even then, this needs to be stated. If you are a dog lover, or an animal lover in general, in any sort of way, avoid this show like the plague. There is a reason as to why this show only lasted 10 episodes, because even back during the time of this show's release on television, it was panned heavily for its, quote, cheap production values. Even though the production values are honestly one of the least offensive things about it. And instead, just watch Courage the Cowardly Dog. That show does everything that this show tries to do, and they do it a million times better. With more likable characters, and making it so that the title character is able to fight back against those who intimidate him, while for this show, a lot of people have forgotten about it, and after sitting through every single episode, this show was forgotten about for a very good reason. Hello guys, before I start this video, this is the disclaimer that needs to be put up. Usually I don't put these kinds of disclaimers in my videos because it's common sense at this point that if someone out there has a disagreement, that we'd agree to disagree when it comes to that specific opinion. But if a lot of these comments that I received, put together with the controversial or glowing reception of the thing being discussed today are anything to go by, this kind of disclaimer does need to be heard more now than ever. If you in any sort of way, like, dislike, or have a neutral opinion on the product being discussed in particular, I suggest you either hear me out so that you know where I'm coming from regarding the product being discussed in particular, or get out now and watch another video, because you might not like what you're about to hear. Because regardless of what some individuals like to believe, I don't cater to the opinions of other people because their opinions are not my own. And I'm not going to forcibly change my opinion on a certain piece of media because someone else told me otherwise, whether if the product in specific is received somewhere between being liked or considered mediocre but I don't like, things that I find overhated but I still have problems with, things that I find mediocre, things that received more hate than praise that I do actually like, or things that I outright dislike but a lot of people like. And to make things as clear as possible, any and all reviews where I did end up saying something that sounds similar to something that someone else said was just by coincidence, because I always wait until after I get done scripting my reviews before watching someone else's review in particular, and that's why I'm putting this disclaimer on this video in specific. If you like or dislike the thing being discussed in this video, all power to you. Just please try to be respectful after you watch this video. This video is not to cater to the fans or haters of the thing being discussed. This is to give out my perspective. Don't be like this individual is what I'm saying, because for over a year after I uploaded my review on Robot Boy, he's been frequently commenting on my video to shove his own opinion on the show down my throat, even after I told him that I respect his opinion on the show and that I just dislike it for the reasons that I already discussed, getting up to the point where I ended up having to block him from my channel because he just wouldn't stop. If you don't like the review in general because of problems that you have, that's fine, but if you're gonna be here just to get on to me for not having the same opinion as you, then this is not the video for you. But if you already know these things, continue on. With all that said, enjoy the video. Well, this one has been a long time coming. Today I'm going to be tackling this little preschool show that goes by the name of Little Brown Bear. This was a series that I got requested by multiple people to take a look at. Almost on the same level of the repeated requests from the same person that I got to take a look at Zip Zip. Now, usually, I don't really take a look at preschool shows, mainly because of the fact that I am too old to really be watching them. However, I will say though that when they are done right, they are really done right. While I haven't seen the following show yet, from what I've been hearing, Lily is a very beloved show that I will probably be taking a look at in the future, and it's been a while since I watched the following shows, but Blue's Clues and Word Girl are also beloved. Blue's Clues is one of the most chill shows ever, and Word Girl has become popular again because of how cleverly written it is. And Arthur is so well written and out of the norm for shows like this, to the point where it's considered for older kids for good reason. But today I'm going to be taking a look at what could possibly be one of the most hated preschool shows of all time, Little Brown Bear. In 2024, the show had already gotten to the status of being one of the most hated preschool shows ever. Like, a lot of people consider this show to be on par with Caillou in terms of shows with bad role models, and so I decided to, for this review, watch every single episode that I could find, and consider this to be one of my more unpopular opinions, but Little Brown Bear is extremely overhated. Granted, that doesn't mean that I think that this show is good, but with how everyone had been hyping this show up as the worst thing ever, you'd think that every single episode would basically be unbearable to watch.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
But no. A lot of what people have been talking about with this show is completely taken out of context. There had been this extremely out of context clip floating around where Little Brown Bear calls his mom horrible after she drags him inside the house, and people have used this clip alone to call Little Brown Bear as being just as bad, if not worse than Caillou. And so, because of this, I went in expecting this show to be like bottom 10 material. But something that a lot of people didn't really do with this show was check to see if there are any other behaviors that Little Brown Bear does in this show that are exactly the same as what he does in that one episode. Because what I usually do for Sean's network reviews is watch every single episode and check to see a pattern of behavior from each of the characters and if they end up improving or not. That's what I did for Thundercats Roar, Ollie's Pack, Robot Boy, Power Players, etc. And the characters that I do dislike in those shows don't get any better outside of the episodes that I talked about in the reviews I did on them. But in watching this series for a review, throughout the rest of the series, not only does he not show any of these behaviors ever again, but also Little Brown Bear is nothing like Caillou. Because if Little Brown Bear was nearly as bad as Caillou, then Little Brown Bear would basically do something like throwing a temper tantrum because he doesn't get to go to the circus until the next day, or pinch a baby's cheek in literally every single episode, but he just doesn't do that. The worst things that Little Brown Bear does in every episode is just be selfish or have an argument with his mom or dad, but with the episodes being as short as they are, Little Brown Bear often goes back to normal extremely quickly. Like, what's the worst thing that Little Brown Bear does in some of these episodes? Oh, he says that his mother is horrible in a sequence where she drags him back into the house when he wanted to do gardening in the rain, and is impatient when the mother says that he can't have a cake in another episode. You guys do realize that this is not out of the norm for children to do, right? I mean, it's not like the show is really showing very over-the-top moments where Little Brown Bear throws a fit and gets rewarded for it or gets off scot-free. I mean, the Katie Kaboom segments from Animaniacs do exactly what people say that Little Brown Bear does, where Katie ends up causing legitimate harm to other people around her and gets no punishment for it, often ending with everyone feeling miserable, and it's not even a one-time occurrence. Nearly every single short has this problem, but yet those segments are not nearly as controversial as Little Brown Bear is. I mean, at the end of that same episode where he desperately wants a cake, Little Brown Bear doesn't even get the cake in return, and every other time, he's not really acting like this. Though, this isn't the first time that I stumbled upon a show that was hyped up to me as being one of the worst things ever. I was constantly spammed at to review Zip Zip by the person who was requesting me to take a look at it, and the overall product ended up not even being that bad in the first place. While on the flip side, I wasn't expecting Family Dog to be as bad as I ended up finding it, and that show, I ended up finding it as actually being one of the worst shows that I've taken a look at so far. And Little Brown Bear is pretty much in the same boat as Zip Zip. A lot of people have told me that the main character is basically this irredeemable monster that is a brat in nearly every episode, but I do have to question if people watch more than a tiny handful of the show's episodes. Because no joke, a lot of the monstrous things that people have pointed out with this show, outside of the Rain episode, are incredibly petty and cherry-picked. And for the record, I did watch every episode of the show, and I was legitimately having a hard time finding any sort of moments where he's bratty, outside of the example that I brought up. What made Caillou so dislikable in his show was that Caillou never really faced repercussions for any of his more egregious actions, plus Caillou comes off as a lot more malicious in that he looks annoyed in each of his episodes. Whenever Little Brown Bear does his worst things in this show, he doesn't really get off scot-free for what he did. He gets called out by his parents for doing that, as opposed to Caillou's parents, whom they just do nothing while their son basically acts like a brat. And at most, I'd say that Little Brown Bear is more of a rascal than anything. It's literally in the show's theme song. And the other things that he does in the show are either through him not knowing any better, or him being a hyperactive kid. And other examples are so cherry-picked and are grasping at straws to the point where it feels like a case of people being overly sensitive. Like, holy moly, Little Brown Bear ate some of the strawberries off the cake. Not that he actually ate the entire cake when he didn't. He just ate some of the strawberries from it. Ooh, Little Brown Bear said that the kitty that they brought into the house is nasty after it scratched him. Even though, again, Little Brown Bear is a child, and he didn't know that the cat was unintentionally scratching him. So, on that front, the hate that's being thrown towards Little Brown Bear is blown way out of proportion. But I can somewhat see as to why people don't like this show. It's very easy to take random clips from a lot of these episodes and say, "Oh my goodness, Little Brown Bear is just as bad as Caillou." Most people that have said out loud that Little Brown Bear is worse than Caillou don't actually explain why, and whatever they do, it's for some of the most cherry-picked reasons ever. But when putting everything into context and watching through the episodes, no, he really isn't even as awful as the general public makes him out to be. In fact, in most of these episodes, outside of the minor arguments that he has with his parents, Little Brown Bear is your average kid that doesn't know any better, and the parents are actually competent in this show to know when their child is acting up before scolding him. And let's face it, after Caillou basically pushed every single boundary imaginable, when it comes to an animated series that basically has a spoiled brat throwing temper tantrums when things don't go his way, people have grown a lot less tolerant of things like this in child characters, to the point where out-of-context scenes where another child character acts up is instantly compared to Caillou, even if they don't act like that throughout the rest of the series. I don't know if it's just me, but considering the fact that I've come across several characters in shows or movies that are a lot worse, including child characters such as Billy from Family Dog or Gus Turner from Robot Boy, whom both have several instances of being downright reprehensible, I do think that this is a case of people being overreactive. But does that mean that Little Brown Bear is a good show? Absolutely not. Now, so far in this review, I have been giving out some unpopular opinions, basically to say that people have been making mountains out of molehills in regards to this show. However, I'm not specifically trying to force out one opinion on this show because other people have told me so, or because I'd get backlash for saying anything other than negative thoughts on it.
Even though I'm still not over what happened back in 2016, because I express my opinions on things like MLPFIM or TMNT Danger of the Ooze, I am so glad that I don't have to deal with any of those people ever again.
Little Brown Bear is still not a good show because there are other things to not like outside of what I pointed out with this show.
If there is one thing that I do agree with the hatedom of the show on, it's that the rain episode is definitely the worst of the entire series.
Like the fact that the show is really bland. Maybe that's the reason as to why I've never heard of this show prior to it becoming infamous. The show just has Little Brown Bear doing a random thing before the episode ends. Given that each episode of the show is only 3 minutes long, and it's incredibly easy to confuse this show with any other animated series that revolves around a family of bears. In fact, when I first heard someone bring this show up in a random conversation, I thought that they were talking about the Nick Jr. series Little Bear, given that both shows revolve around a family of bears, and you also have the Berenstain Bears, which was airing around the exact same time that this show was released. So not only did this show have a similar sounding name as a Nick Jr. show that was more popular around that time, but there was another show that revolved around a family of bears that was airing at the same time that was also based on a popular book series. And while they were at it, both shows had more fully established characters that audiences presumably gravitated towards at the time, while Little Brown Bear was a series of scenarios at most. Which is probably why this show ended up being forgotten about until it grew an infamous reputation. It's a series of incredibly basic shorts at best, while being incredibly dull at worst. But like I said at the beginning, because I said that this show was overhated, but not good either, where would this show fall in regards to shows I reviewed in Sean's network reviews? Well, it's better than Power Players and Kamp Koral, because this show was less of a slog to get through, and Zipped It because this show's premise makes sense and doesn't go against itself constantly, but the show is incredibly bland and dull, but is overhated at the exact same time. And regardless of what people say about the series, the theme song is definitely the best part of it. And it's one of the only things in this show that I do legitimately have something actually good to say about it. And this theme song, being in a show that is as bland as it is, has no right to slap this much, but it does exactly that.
Little brown bear.
Even though there are other cartoon intros that are admittedly much better than it.